So picture this. There's a dimension beyond anything you could possibly imagine, called Zenith. The sky's made of stardust and newborn galaxies. The throne is carved from the core of an ancient star, and the guy sitting on it has hair like frozen void and eyes containing billions of solar systems. His name is Ursilium, and he is the supreme god. Not a king, not a ruler. The beginning of all beginnings. Speak his name anywhere in the universe, and black holes stop eating, nebulous storms freeze, and every lesser god across every dimension drops face first into the floor. And yet, behind all that absolute magnificence, the guy was bored out of his eternal mind. He'd been sitting on that throne for thousands of years. Millions, maybe billions. Tom had stopped meaning anything. He watched everything through this enormous crystal orb. Every war, every ant carrying crumbs, and it all played out exactly as he'd set it up from the very first tick of time. The problem with being omniscient and omnipotent was that he'd lost the one thing any conscious being actually needs. Surprise. He knew exactly how every civilization would rise, peak, and faceplant into its own greed. He'd watched that cycle repeat billions of times. No challenges, no struggle, no happiness. Just an endless, suffocating boredom that was making his very existence feel like it was dissolving. Then his attendant showed up, Mencilia. She was this breathtakingly beautiful woman in a gown woven from comet threads, blue hair cascading to the floor, translucent wings glowing with galaxies. She was his right hand, the only entity in all of Zenith who could stand near him without getting shattered by the pressure of his power. She knelt down and started her report. Wars concluded. Everything in perfect equilibrium, the usual. He didn't even answer, just stared at this orb showing a planet getting wrecked by meteors, completely hollow. Then he asked her this philosophical question. What's the saddest thing about having everything? She gave this beautiful, devoted answer about how he was perfection itself. And he laughed. This dry, dead laugh. Said perfection used to sound beautiful, but now it felt like a prison. A prison built from eternal routine. Then he stood up, and all of Zenith trembled, and he told her he'd made a decision. He was going to retire. Silence. Time itself seemed to freeze. Mencilia broke millions of years of perfect etiquette and looked up at him like he'd lost his mind. She stammered out his name, and he laid it out plain. He was tired. Tired of sitting on the throne doing nothing. Tired of being untouchable. He wanted to stop being a god. She lost it completely, threw herself face first onto the crystal floor, begging him to take it back. He was the foundation of reality. Without him, who keeps the cosmic order running? He told her the problem was exactly that. He'd built a system too perfect. The universe ran itself now. Stars would keep rising, keep dying, and being reborn. His absence wouldn't unravel a thing. She asked what purpose they all had without him. He told her to live for themselves. She refused, grabbed his robe, abandoned every boundary between God and servant, offered to create millions of new dimensions for him to destroy, summon ancient dragon gods for him to fight. Anything but this. His decision was final. A magic circle appeared beneath his feet, millions of ancient runes spinning. Soul, transmutation magic. Absolute tier, reincarnation. He was going to erase his memories, seal his power, and reincarnate. She screamed at him. Where? As what? A war god? A dragon sovereign? He laughed, genuinely laughed. Something she'd never heard in all of creation. He didn't want to be a god or a king or any superior being. He pointed at this projection in his orb, a tiny blue planet orbiting a yellow star. Earth. He was going to reincarnate as an ordinary human there. She couldn't process it. Humans were fragile, short-lived, sick, limited. Why would the being who held the entire universe want to become something so breakable? He said he wanted to know what hunger felt like, what cold felt like, what failure felt like. He wanted to look up at the night sky and actually wonder what was up there without already knowing every answer. The light blazed. The runes spun faster. His final words to her were a simple farewell. Then a flash of white light swept through the chamber, and the throne was empty. The absolute aura that had always filled Zenith was just gone. Mencilia stayed on the floor crying. Each tear bloomed into a crystalline lotus when it hit the ground. Then she lifted her head, and the despair in her eyes had been replaced by something terrifying. She whispered the name Earth, said she wouldn't allow him to suffer through mortal hardship. If he was reincarnating there as a human, she was going to, in disguise. She'd make sure his life was perfect. And if any lowly human dared cause him even a moment of pain, she'd obliterate the entire planet. Meanwhile, millions of light years away, a baby boy was born at a modest clinic on the outskirts of a small village on Earth. He cried loudly, greeting his new mortal world, a world that had no idea the sovereign of the entire universe had just joined their ranks. And somewhere above the cosmic clouds, an impossibly overprotective attendant was already making preparations to follow her lord to that poor, unsuspecting blue planet. The flash of light faded, but instead of finding herself alone in the throne room, Mencilia realized the scenery had changed entirely. They were in the sanctum of Genesis, the supreme god's private space beyond the reach of any reality. Ursilium stood at the center with his back to her, still whole, not yet faded into a reincarnated soul. He explained that the flash had just been his way of sealing Zenith's access from outside gods, so they could speak privately. There were critical matters to settle before he truly departed for Earth. He laid out 3 problems. First, his body. If he reincarnated carrying the full weight of his divine existence, Earth would be reduced to cosmic dust before his soul even grazed the atmosphere. He needed to separate his soul from his physical form. Second, once his soul departed, that empty divine body would become the most dangerous artifact in all of reality, saturated with limitless energies of creation and destruction. If it fell into the hands of lesser gods or demon kings, the multiverse balance would collapse. They needed a place to hide and seal it. Third, if the trillions of beings across the universe learned the throne of Zenith stood empty because its sovereign had become a human, mass panic would erupt. Wars for power everywhere. So Mencilia needed to announce he'd departed on a grand journey to seek his cosmic identity. A sacred lie to keep order calm. Mencilia stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the meticulous precision of that plan. No gaps, no loose threads. He genuinely intended to leave, yet he wasn't leaving the universe to crumble in his wake. She bowed respectfully and agreed. The first task was the announcement. Mencilia closed her eyes and concentrated. As the voice of the supreme god, her telepathy could penetrate every dimension, every galaxy, every heaven and hell. Her divine voice resonated across every corner of the multiverse, declaring that the absolute sovereign had embarked upon the grand journey to the boundless edges of existence. War gods mid-swing prostrated themselves. Ancient dragons in the draconic realm bowed their massive heads. Demon kings in the abyss swallowed hard in fear. No one was suspicious. No one dared question the will of the supreme god. For the body hiding spot, she found a dead universe called Venuum. An absolute void where space and time were distorted, where even molecules stopped moving. Any entity that set foot there would be conceptually frozen for eternity. Ursilium remembered creating that failed dimension billions of years ago. Perfect place, but how to enter it? Even with magical protection, Venuum would tear through her authority and freeze her forever. Ursilium's answer was to compress half of his absolute power into a physical form. It made all of Zenith tremble. For the first time in eternity, cold sweat traced down his temple. Compressing infinite energy into a tiny vessel directly opposed the laws of his own creation. A small explosion of golden light burst in his palm, and what remained was a pitch-black ring bearing an obsidian gemstone with a tiny galaxy swirling inside. The Ring of Overlord. He slipped it onto Mencilia's finger, and she felt like she could shatter 1,000 galaxies with a snap. They transported to Venuum. Beyond dark, a suffocating nothingness. No up or down, no sound. Only the ring's golden protective field kept them from being frozen and erased. At the center, Ursilium shaped the very nothingness into a physical object. a great coffin carved with millions of sealing runes, designed to contain his body's energy and conceal it from every form of tracking. Then he told her to take his life, separate his soul from the body. Even knowing this was the plan, the command shattered her from the inside. Her hand trembled violently. He stepped forward, took her trembling hand, and placed it directly over his left chest where his divine heart beat with the force of a supernova. He told her not to hesitate. Only the ring's power could penetrate his physical defenses. This was his final command as a god. Tears escaped her eyes, drifting weightlessly in the void. She shut her eyes, bit her lip until she tasted blood, and channeled everything. With a single thrust filled with equal parts resolve and despair, her hand passed through his chest. No blood, no tearing, just an explosion of cosmic light. She seized the core of his soul, a sphere of pure radiant light pulsing with the warmth of 1 billion lives, and wrenched it free. She laid the body in the coffin. His face looked like he was sleeping peacefully. She brushed her fingers against his cold cheek one last time before sealing the lid. The cosmic locks echoed through the void. His body was sealed away forever. Using the ring's remaining power, they returned to the normal universe. The soul of Ursilium floated in her palm, and from within it, a quiet laugh resonated in her mind. He said he couldn't wait to begin his new life. The soul shot forward, its speed surpassing the very concept of space itself. It pierced through dimensional boundaries, crossing thousands of galaxies in the blink of an eye, heading for a single specific coordinate on the multiverse map. The Milky Way galaxy, the solar system, the planet Earth. In an instant, the orb plunged through Earth's blue atmosphere. He had no physical eyes, yet his absolute consciousness perceived everything. He felt the billions of human souls pulsing across the surface. He searched for the right vessel. It had to be clean, untainted by worldly karma, and positioned at the precise threshold between flesh and the formation of new life. He found his target, a woman sleeping soundly in a quiet care room late at night. Her pregnancy at exactly 120 days, the phase in Earth's spiritual laws where a human soul begins to be breathed into the fetus. Impeccably timed, he thought. Without hesitation, the cosmic orb passed through the clinic wall, through blankets and layers of flesh, and entered her womb. The mortal vessel was far too fragile, so Ursilium wove millions of restriction spells on himself. He sealed his memories, locked away 99.999% of his cosmic energy, and suppressed his divine essence until he truly felt like a helpless mortal. The sensation of powerlessness was foreign, painful, and thrillingly exciting. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring. In a brightly lit delivery room, amid frantic nurses and an exhausted mother pushing with everything she had, a sharp, ringing cry shattered the silence. A baby boy, perfectly healthy. The father pressed his lips to his wife's forehead, then gazed at the tiny infant. The baby opened his eyes, deep black, but if you looked closely enough, something shimmered far within those pupils. A faint scatter of stardust behind a gaze that should have known nothing yet. The supreme god of Zenith, whose breath had once made the universe tremble, was now wrapped in a cheap cotton baby blanket, blinking against clinic lights. And high above, piercing through layers of cloud and atmosphere, a pair of crystal blue eyes belonging to an impossibly overprotective attendant were watching him from orbit, poised to intervene in his ordinary human life at any moment she deemed necessary. The hospital in that bustling city was only a temporary stop. The baby boy and his parents, Brunt Blanco and his still exhausted wife Miraida, brought him home to a place called Kagan Village. They named him Zenota Blanco. Kagan was a coastal community that seemed to resist the passage of time, sitting at the boundary between open ocean and untamed wilderness. The air always carried sea salt mixed with wood smoke. Villagers were farmers, fishermen, blacksmiths, tailors. 2 routes connected them to the outside world. A harbor dock for trade ships, and a far more dangerous overland road cutting through the Wrathwood, a dense forest full of fearsome beasts. Because of those dangers, Kagan regularly attracted adventurers. The first 4 years of Zenoda's life passed entirely without incident. Little Zenoda was not a fussy child. He rarely cried. More often than not, he sat on the wooden veranda, gazing at the open sea with eyes that held far too much depth for a toddler. His mother worried he was too quiet. His father figured he was just calm. At least he didn't knock over merchant barrel collections like the neighbor's kids. That peaceful happiness shattered the year Zenoda turned 5. Brunt was chopping firewood in the backyard. Several enormous oak logs, each over 100 kilograms, lay scattered across the ground. He stepped inside to grab his whetstone. When he came back, a massive log had rolled loose and was heading straight for Zenoda, who was crouched down watching a beetle. Brunt screamed, sprinted, but he was too far away. The 5-year-old simply stood up, raised one small hand, stopped the rolling log like it had hit an invisible steel wall. Then, with the casual ease of someone picking up a bed pillow, grabbed the bark with one hand and hoisted the entire oak log above his head. Said it was heavy in a completely flat tone, then tossed it aside. It hit the ground with a thunderous crash that sent a visible tremor through the earth. Brunt's axe hit the ground with a pitiful clang. His jaw hung open. His son, who barely reached his hip, had already gone back to checking on whether his beetle survived. That was when they understood. Their child was not an ordinary human being. Ursilium's cosmic seals had locked away his divine memories and power, but Zenoda's physical body was continuously adapting to the absolute soul dwelling within it. Without anyone's awareness, the boy's body had evolved beyond human limits. Alarmed, Brunt and Merida rushed him to the village healer, who examined him for half an hour and came away completely baffled. Medically speaking, it was simply impossible for him to have lifted that weight. Merida's instincts told her something beyond medicine was at work. She suggested taking him to Sister Nyana at the Kagan church. The church clergy possessed spiritual sight, the ability to perceive the flow of mana and read the innate gifts a person was born with. Inside the cool, incense-scented hall, Nyana greeted them. Pale blonde hair, braided neatly, white robe embroidered with golden thread, eyes closed, yet everyone knew she saw the world with far greater clarity than anyone whose eyes were open. She immediately sensed an extraordinary existence between the parents. She knelt before Zenoda, who was happily eating dry bread, and asked to touch his forehead. He gave a slow nod, still chewing. She pressed 2 fingers to his forehead, glowing with holy light, intending to read the gifts the gods had bestowed on him at birth. The irony being she was touching the soul of a god himself. For a second, she smiled. Second, her brow furrowed. Third second, the color drained entirely from her face. Cold sweat broke out. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came. Inside Zenoda's spiritual dimension, she didn't see a gentle stream of energy like any ordinary child. She saw an ocean of absolute cosmic energy, so vast it exceeded all imagination, bound in place by millions of enormous sealing chains. Only the tiniest mote of dust was leaking through into his physical body, yet even that single mote was enough to pulverize a mountain. Gasping, she wrenched her hand away and collapsed onto the stone floor. After catching her breath, she told the parents that Zenoda was exceptional, something that perhaps came into the world once every 1,000 years. He was destined to inherit the 3 primary gifts. Brunt and Merida went pale. 1 gift meant recruitment by a kingdom or academy. 2 gifts was the mark of a hero. 3 was the stuff of living legend. The first gift emerging was transcendent physical strength. His body would continuously absorb natural energy and convert it into muscle density beyond all human comprehension. That was why he lifted the log. But Nyana's next words turned any pride to ice. In this harsh world, an extraordinary gift was not a blessing. It was a Pandora's box. If the dark guilds, corrupt kingdoms, or military factions learned a child from a remote village carried 3 legendary gifts, they'd come hunting. He'd be turned into a weapon, brainwashed, or handed to dark sorcerers who wanted to steal his gifts. They needed to train him to conceal his power until he could protect himself. From that day forward, Zenoda's life had one absolute rule for his father. Never use your full strength in front of outsiders. Years passed. Zenota grew into a handsome boy with always calm eyes. He learned not to break doors, not to shatter glasses, to pretend he was struggling with a laundry basket. But containing the potential of a former cosmic god was like wrapping fire in a single sheet of thin paper. The second incident happened when he was 9. Sitting at a cliff edge watching the sea, he felt a strange warmth rise from near his navel, spreading through his veins. Pure mana. For an ordinary person, opening a mana circuit required months of meditation and an expensive tutor. Zenota accomplished it by sitting on a cliff and daydreaming about the sea. His body responded automatically, drawing on sealed muscle memory of a god. He raised his hand toward the ocean, and a spinning mass of water the size of a boulder tore itself from the surface and flew to him. He flicked his finger, and it split into thousands of tiny water arrows hanging suspended around him. Then he raised his other hand, and the sea breeze reversed, forming a mini tornado centered on him. Water and wind, two elemental affinities mastered simultaneously without a single incantation. Unfortunately, his mother witnessed the entire thing while bringing him lunch. The basket hit the ground. When the mini tornado vanished and the water arrows plummeted like a rainstorm, Zenota looked over with complete innocence and said he was just playing with water. That night, Brunt and Mirida nearly fainted from stress. They reinforced the rules and had thick leather gloves made for Zenota, on the logic that he'd be less likely to accidentally discharge elemental magic in the village. By age 12, Zenota had started watching the village guards and adventurers spar at the training ground. To his dark, star-flecked eyes, their movements felt incredibly slow. Too many wasted motions, terrible weight distribution, defensive openings wide enough to walk through. The combat instincts of Ursilium, who had observed trillions of wars across countless galaxies, translated every exchange into simple equations. One day, a veteran adventurer named Garrick was showing off and challenging anyone brave enough. Without quite meaning to, Zenota dropped from the fence and picked up a wooden sword. Garrick laughed at the kid, never finished his sentence. In a single blink, Zenota crossed 5 meters, deflected Garrick's blade from a blind angle, shifted the big man's center of gravity with precise foot placement, and with one controlled flick of his wrist, the tip of his wooden sword rested against Garrick's throat. The grown man's sword spun through the air and buried itself in the dirt. Complete silence. Even a blacksmith's anvil stopped ringing. Zenota apologized politely in a flat tone, told Garrick his stance was too open on the left flank and his grip too rigid, then walked home like he'd done nothing more notable than pick up a leaf. Every adventurer and guard stood in profound collective shock. At 12, Zenota Blanco's mastery of armed combat had already surpassed any adult fighter or royal knight. The Pandora's box could no longer be kept shut. A rumor began traveling quietly through Kagan about a miraculous child with unmatched power. And before long, that rumor would cross the sea, reaching ears the Blanco family never wanted to know existed. 3 years had passed since that dusty training ground. At 15, Zenota Blanco had grown from a quiet boy into a young man who drew admiring looks everywhere. Broad shoulders, straight posture, muscles with perfect definition. Thick black hair left slightly longer, framing a face that always radiated absolute calm. In Kagan Village, secrets couldn't be kept forever. Despite Brunt and Marida's efforts, the villagers slowly learned. But something touching happened. Instead of selling his secret to the military, every resident agreed to say nothing. They regarded Zenota as the village's golden child, a secret guardian sent by the gods. And how could they not love him? Zenota was a remarkably hard-working young man who helped anyone who needed it. Early mornings, he was already in the wheat fields carrying 10 50-kilogram grain sacks without a drop of sweat. Midday, when the village well ran low, he'd show up on the pretense of clearing algae, then secretly use his water magic to fill it to the brim. The villagers pretended not to notice, cheering the natural miracle that seemed to happen whenever Zenota was nearby. Afternoons, he taught young would-be adventurers at the edge of the Wrathwood. For someone who had once been sovereign of every cosmic dimension, teaching mortals to hunt was like teaching ants to walk. Yet he genuinely enjoyed it. He was beginning to understand what it meant to belong to a community, something he'd never experienced in billions of years on the throne of Zenith. But peace was never permanent in Kagan. One blazing day, Zenoda was helping his father chop firewood when frantic shouting tore through the village. A guard came stumbling in, white-faced. A large merchant convoy had been ambushed on the overland route by ironclad bears and shadow wolves. Their guards were being cut down. Garrick bellowed orders to round up the adventurers. Zenoda picked up his woodcutting axe and stepped forward. Brunt grabbed his arm. Those weren't ordinary monsters. If he used that power in front of outsiders, the kingdom's attention would follow. Zenoda looked at his father steadily. There were human lives hanging by a thread out there. The power he kept hidden meant nothing if he stood by and let innocent people die. He promised he wouldn't use magic, only physical strength and technique. No one would be suspicious if he just looked like a strong village boy. Brunt swallowed and released his grip. Within 10 minutes, the rescue party was cutting through the forest at a run. Zenoda had to actively hold himself back to avoid leaving everyone behind. The smell of blood hit before the scene came into view. 3 overturned carriages, scattered cargo, dead horses. 7 battered guards in a desperate circular formation around a trembling merchant clutching an ornate box. 3 ironclad bears standing nearly 3 meters tall, a dozen shadow wolves snarling with saliva-dripping fangs. Just as they arrived, a bear's claw shattered a guard's shield and hurled him like a rag doll. The formation collapsed. The wolves crouched to lunge. The rescue party charged in, but their fire magic bounced off the bear's hides, and the wolves were too fast for arrows. In that fraction of a second, the combat instincts of Ursilium snapped wide awake inside Zenoda's soul. Not magic, not divine aura. Pure distilled killing articolo. He moved. His footsteps made no sound. To ordinary eyes, he simply teleported. A shadow wolf launched itself at the merchant's throat. Zenoda swung his woodcutting axe in one perfect diagonal arc. The rusted blade passed through the wolf's neck so cleanly that blood only sprayed a full second after its head separated. The headless corpse nearly landed on the merchant's shoes. Every monster froze. Their instincts screamed that the creature before them sat at the absolute apex of the universal food chain. But hunger overrode fear. 2 ironclad bears charged from left and right. Garrick shouted that normal iron couldn't pierce their hides. Zenoda didn't give an inch. He tracked the junction between bone plates at the first bear's neck, dropped into a low stance, evading the sweeping claw by exactly 1 millimeter, and swung his axe upward from below. An ordinary axe head driven at extraordinary speed found the weakest joint and punched through into the brain. The beast died instantly. Without pausing, he released the axe lodged in the carcass, pivoted, drew back his right fist, and drove his knuckles squarely into the second bear's chest. A concussive blast. The air behind the bear rippled from the shockwave. Its heart pulverized inside its chest without a single mark on the hide. Several hundred kilograms launched backward into a pine tree. The remaining wolves tucked their tails and scattered into the forest. Silence. Garrick and everyone stared at Zenoda's back with expressions of complete blankness. How could a village youth put down Class B monsters in 3 breaths? Zenoda shook the blood from his hand and turned with his characteristic flat expression. The area was clear. Healers, attend to the wounded. Garrick clapped his shoulder with a trembling hand. Called him an absolute madman. Zenoda smiled politely. Just luck, he said. His axe happened to catch the weak point. A thoroughly terrible excuse, but everyone from Kagan swallowed it whole. The merchant, Master Vivaldi, was the head of a mid-sized trading firm with connections to the capital. He stayed in Kagan for a full week recovering, and over that time he found himself captivated by the young man who had saved his life. He watched Zenoda help villagers, witnessed his beyond rational strength, noted his maturity far beyond his years. His merchant instinct screamed that this boy was an uncut gem of incalculable worth. The day of departure arrived. At the harbor, Vivaldi bowed deeply before Zenota, a gesture rarely offered by a merchant of noble standing to a common villager. He said his life and every one of his people's lives belonged to Zenota. Zenota replied calmly that they owed him nothing. Helping one another was simply what people were supposed to do. Vivaldi smiled, then looked directly into his eyes. A talent like his was too great to wither in a coastal village. A dragon couldn't spend its whole life hiding at the bottom of a shallow pond. He reached into his coat and produced a gold badge engraved with a scale and crossed swords. In 2 months, the Royal Academy of Magic and Knights would hold its open entrance examinations, open to all social classes. The one true path to greatness on the continent. He asked if Zenota would consider visiting the city of Corson. A gust of sea wind swept dry leaves spiraling around them. Zenota's eyes fixed on the gold badge in his palm. As a god, he had looked upon billions of gleaming intergalactic cities. But as a mortal young man named Zenota, this invitation was a key to opening the gates of the real world. A world full of intrigue, magic, swords, and perhaps genuine danger capable of making the divine blood within him run hot once more. The gold badge lay on Zenota's wooden table, catching moonlight through the window. Several days had passed since Vivaldi's convoy departed, yet the merchant's offer kept revolving in the 15-year-old's mind. Should he leave this home to see a wider world? In his previous existence, as Ursilium, he'd seen the entire order of the universe laid bare. But seeing from atop a cosmic throne was entirely different from setting feet on ground that was dirty and soaked in blood. He'd reincarnated to experience true adventure. Corson surely held things he'd never find in this quiet coastal village. But what about father and mother? They were the people who gave him the warmth of a family. Leaving felt wrong. His heart was split cleanly in two. On one side, a fierce longing to push past his limits. On the other, an emotional anchor called family. This kind of turmoil was entirely new to the former god. A thoroughly human dilemma that made him smile with quiet bitterness before sleep took him. The next morning, sunrise brought the familiar routine. Zenota was already in the backyard with his father, chopping firewood for winter. Brunt swung with labored breaths, while Zenota split logs with machine-like precision, deliberately slowed to avoid appearing conspicuous. Brunt noticed his son seemed unfocused. Still thinking about that merchant's gold badge? Before Zenota could answer, cheerful footsteps and a call broke in. Anisha, reddish-brown hair in 2 braids, light leather adventurer attire. Garrick needed Zenota's help training new adventurers of the guild. Zenota agreed, strapped a short dagger to his lower back beneath his cloak, and headed over. The afternoon air felt hotter than usual, and not because of the sun. When Zenota arrived, Garrick was standing with his jaw clenched, visibly restraining anger, facing a group of unknown adventurers. 5 adult men, bodies covered in old scars, carrying a great sword, dual axes, and a worn magical staff. Their leader, a bald man named Dargan with a long scar down his face, let out a contemptuous snort when he saw Zenota. This runny-nosed brat was supposed to train the Iron Fong, who'd slaughtered dozens of monsters on the southern border. Garrick snapped that in Kagan, age didn't determine skill. This boy's techniques surpassed all 5 of them put together. Dargan spat on the ground. They'd come to this backwater for training, not to be made a laughingstock. Zenota raised his hand, signaling Garrick to stop. He stepped forward with measured, unhurried steps. No fear, no nervousness, not even the faintest flicker of offense. He asked if they genuinely refused to be trained. Obviously not, one of them shot back. This was an insult. Zenota noticed 3 other young adventurers hanging back, keeping their distance from the Iron Fong's posturing. Karam, a quiet spear user. Ziriel, an archer with sharp eyes. Lanaya, a gentle-faced healing mage. They were independent, happy to follow the village rules. Zenota told Garrick to clear the center of the ground. Now, it was just Zenota facing 5 fully armed adult men. Dargan drew his great sword. Zenota said conversationally that he only wanted to see whether their arrogance matched their ability. He'd let them strike first. That provocation detonated their fury. All five charged. Zenota registered that they weren't amateurs. They moved with lethal coordination, forming a perfect encirclement. But his mind was still weighted with questions about his future, and he was working hard to suppress his transcendent strength. When Dargan swung his great sword, Zenota tilted aside easily. What he failed to account for was the dual-axe user dropping low from a blind spot. At the speed he was simulating, it was too fast to avoid. The axe tore through his linen shirt and bit into his skin along his right side. Fresh red blood seeped across his shirt, and then the sensation arrived. Heat, pain, a sharp, stinging, pulsing burn. Zenota's eyes flew wide open. In billions of years as the supreme god, not a single thing had ever pierced his skin. He'd watched mortal creatures whimper from injury countless times without understanding what it felt like from the inside. He'd longed for exactly this, and now he felt it. It was terrible, torturous, but at the same time, the pain ignited something. A primitive emotion sleeping at the very bottom of his soul. Pure, unfiltered rage. He staggered back, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. Dargan laughed, sensing the advantage shifting, told him to get on his knees and beg. Dargan's sentence was cut off by the aura that detonated from Zenota's body. The air across the entire training ground grew heavy. Those calm eyes were now sharp as an executioner's blade. He gripped his short dagger, but left it sheathed, using the rigid leather tip and iron pommel as blunt weapons instead. Without a single footstep sound, Zenota vanished, materialized directly in front of Dargan, drove the iron pommel into his solar plexus with a rotation of his hips that detonated pure kinetic force. The impact sounded like a steel, mace-demolishing stone. Dargan vomited blood, eyes rolled back, body hurled 5 meters through a wooden fence. Unconscious before he hit the ground, the other four froze. Too late. Zenota's shadow was already moving. He snapped the dual-axe user's knee sideways with a kick, caught his jaw on the upswing, rotated in the air, ducked beneath the flank attackers, drove the pommel into the back of each neck. They dropped like puppets with cut strings. The mage had barely raised his staff when a sheathed dagger appeared at his throat. He dropped his staff and fainted from pure psychological terror. Less than 5 seconds. 5 veteran adventurers lay sprawled and helpless. Zenota stood in the center, breathing slightly elevated, blood still flowing from his side. He turned to Garrick and said, in words like an absolute decree, that men like these would put a blade in a comrade's back for gold coins. Drive them out. Garrick surprised him by refusing. When he looked at them, he saw himself when he was young. Volatile, arrogant, nearly died countless times. If Kagan had only driven him out without a second chance, he'd be rotting in a gutter in Corson. They'd been beaten thoroughly, their pride shattered. Under his guidance, they could become better adventurers. Zenota went quiet. He absorbed Garrick's words carefully. In his past life, if any entity had dared defy him, the consequence was total erasure from the cosmic order. But humans held a complicated concept called redemption. Garrick was choosing a far harder path than simply discarding the problem. The young man exhaled slowly, pressing his hand against his wounded side. He understood the decision, even as his divine instincts pushed back. He respected Garrick's choice. Then he turned toward Anesia and the 3 young outsiders, who were still staring at him with expressions caught somewhere between awe and fear. Particularly Lanaya, the healing mage, whose eyes hadn't moved from the bloodstains spreading across his shirt. He forced a thin smile. Sorry for the wait. Training starts now. That day, the first physical wound Zenota ever received did more than draw blood. It dismantled the invisible wall between his existence as an untouchable god and his new reality. A reality where he could be hurt, feel rage, and learn what it meant to have compassion for others. The pain had been awful. The rage had been terrifying. But both were proof that he was truly alive now, truly mortal, truly part of a world where actions had consequences and flesh could break. And somewhere deep within him, the doubt that had kept him awake the night before began finding its answer. This world was painful enough to matter, and because of that, it was absolutely worth exploring. After the Iron Fang incident, the atmosphere at Kagan's training ground shifted. Word of Zenota dismantling 5 veterans in seconds made passing outsiders far more careful. For the 4 young people who witnessed it, fear had transformed into blazing admiration. Zenota began training Zerial, Karam, Lanaya, and Anisha in earnest. He observed their breathing patterns, muscle structures, mana circulation, and mapped out each one's maximum potential using knowledge spanning millions of civilizations. That night by oil lamp, he committed their futures to parchment. Karam, enormous bone structure, perfect tank. Zerial, nearly soundless footsteps, lethal assassin instincts. Lanaya, exceptionally pure mana circuit, strong light element affinity, the team's future heart. Anisha, explosive personality matching her destructive fire element, the team's primary artillery. He divided training accordingly. Karam and Zerial drilled directly in physical combat. For the girls, he arranged sessions with Sister Nyana at the church to refine their holy magic safely. Several nights later, at the blacksmith's forge, Zenota spread 4 weapon blueprints across the table. Designs drawn from Ursilium's memories of elite cosmic knight armaments, adapted for Earth materials. The blacksmith and Garrick leaned in, eyes wide. The complexity, the aerodynamic balance, the mana conductor engravings. The smith said it would take a full year to complete all 4 legendary pieces properly. Zenota said that was fine. He needed exactly a year to build their bodies and minds worthy of wielding them. When Zenota asked about the cost, the blacksmith laughed. Put the coins away. Since he was small, Zenota had helped the village without asking for anything. Plowed fields when farmers fell ill, pumped water during dry seasons, saved guards' lives. Every person in the village owed him their safety. Consider these weapons their way of paying that debt. Something warm spread through Zenota's chest. In his previous life, trillions of golden offerings and entire planets had been laid before him, all out of fear. But here, he was being given something infinitely more precious, out of genuine affection. He thanked them softly with a real smile and left with a resolve that felt, if anything, more solid than before. Garrett clapped his shoulder with a proud smile, asked if he thought they were blind. They knew he hid the full scale of his strength so as not to frighten them. Every person in the village owed him their safety and comfort. Consider these weapons their way of paying that debt on behalf of everyone. 1 year later, the sea winds and relentless training had forged the 4 into diamonds. Karam now filled the doorway. Zerial moved like the night wind. Lanaya's holy aura could calm wild animals. Anisha shaped flame without singeing a hair. Zenota decided it was time for a final examination. He challenged all 4 to fight him simultaneously on a windswept sea cliff. Anisha was immediately opposed. Even as strong as he was, 4 against 1 after a year of training, he could get seriously hurt. Zenota's expression left no room for negotiation. If they could wound him, they passed. If they hesitated, they'd die out there. Karam took command, charged forward like a battering ram. Zenota absorbed the full shield charge with a single hand, casually as stopping a toddler. But that was only a distraction. Zerial moved like a fired bullet from behind Karam's shield. Zenota launched himself upward to escape the pincer. At 10 meters above ground, Zerial appeared directly before him in midair, buffed by Lanaya's leap of faith holy magic. Their blades clashed high above the ground. Then Anisha unleashed her meteor shower, dozens of fire spheres screaming upward. But Zerial was in the same line of fire. What happened next stopped Zenota cold. A miracle of team coordination. Karam activated a newly awakened innate ability, cover, flashing directly in front of the airborne Zerial, interposing his mana-plated shield between Zerial and the barrage. Then Anisha's staff blazed as bright as a small sun. Flame Phoenix, a massive bird of pure plasma, tore through the air and slammed into Zenota's water barrier. The collision triggered an explosion of superheated steam. His barrier cracked, shattered. The firebird struck him full in the chest. He plummeted from the sky like a burned-out meteor, carving a meter-deep crater. The four stood, catching their breath. They'd actually knocked him down. They hooped, hugged each other, let their guard down completely. Fatal mistake. An unnatural gust swept the smoke clear. Zenoda was gone. Before Karam turned his head, a black shadow flickered through all four of them at once. For sound of wood splitting, their weapons were all severed cleanly in two. Zenoda stood 5 paces behind them, slightly singed but completely unharmed. Their teamwork had become genuinely formidable, he said. But remember the final lesson. Never lower your guard. A fight isn't over until you're truly, completely safe. Then he told them their graduation gift was waiting at the blacksmith's forge. All 4 pairs of eyes lit up before they scattered in a gleeful stampede. Then, a ring of sacred green light bloomed across the grassy bluff. Every trace of fatigue, every bruise, every minor burn healed in an instant. Even Zenoda's singed clothing returned to its unmarked state. Lanaya stood with her eyes closed in quiet prayer. Zenoda gave her a small, respectful nod. This girl was frightening. Her support magic and wide-area healing had developed with extraordinary speed, almost on par with Sister Nyana herself. He resheathed his training dagger and clapped his hands once. You have all grown tremendously. I'm proud of every one of you. But remember the final lesson. Never lower your guard. Don't become careless just because you believe the enemy is finished. A fight isn't over until you're truly, completely safe. Training finished for today. And as their graduation gift, he pointed toward the village center. Go to the blacksmith's forge tonight. Their real weapons have been waiting there. All 4 pairs of eyes lit up before they scattered in a gleeful stampede, leaving Zenoda standing there with a quietly amused smile. That evening, the sky over Kagan was painted in deep orange and red. Zenoda sat alone atop a large sea rock at the water's edge. The rhythmic sound of waves was his only company. He was deep in thought. The year he'd set for himself was complete. His work here was finished. He needed to venture out, push through the boundaries of this continent, make his way to the academy in Corson. In the middle of his thoughts, footsteps drifted across the sand. His father, his mother, and Uncle Garrick walking toward him together. They settled on the rocks beside him, joining his gaze out over the open sea. A quiet moment passed before Zenoda found the courage to speak. He wanted to study at the academy, see what lay beyond. Miraida lowered her head, hiding tears. Brunt drew his arm around his wife's shoulders, then looked at Zenoda with the proud, aching smile of a father who'd already made his peace. They'd had a feeling this was coming. An eagle wasn't born to die inside a cage. Their blessing was his. Go, son. Leave his mark on this continent. Zenoda went still. He'd half expected his father to forbid it outright. Then Brunt reached behind his back for something hidden. A long object wrapped in black silk. He placed it across Zenoda's lap. Inside lay a sword sheathed in deep ebony wood. When he drew the handle, a gently curved steel blade caught the light of the evening sun. A katana, forged using ancient mana technique, with an aura of cold, deadly stillness. The balance was perfect, designed precisely to accommodate both his blinding speed and transcendent physical strength. Brunt had commissioned it a year ago, at the same time Zenoda was placing orders for his students' weapons. The blacksmith and Garrick kept it secret, and Sister Nyana personally gave it a high-level blessing. The blade would never dull and could channel and withstand the flow of his elemental magic. Inside Kagan Church, sacred stillness filled the air. Before the altar, a towering statue of the creator goddess stood in serene majesty. Zenoda stared at the marble face, the cosmic wings, the flowing hair. The resemblance was far too precise to be coincidence. But before he could examine it, his friends bowed their heads in prayer. Sister Nyana channeled holy mana. Feeling out of place, Zenoda lowered his head and did his best to look like he was praying. The instant he closed his eyes, reality distorted. The stone church shuddered violently. Not an earthquake, a spatial vibration tearing at the fabric of the air itself. Stained glass rattled, candles extinguished, invisible pressure made it hard to breathe. Anisha shrieked and fell. Karam raised his shield. Even Sister Nyana was wide open with panic, saying the flow of space and time was shifting. In the midst of chaos, Zenota didn't move. Every sound faded to static. The church melted away like paint dissolving in water. When he opened his eyes, he stood in a space entirely white. No sky, no ground, no horizon. A conceptual void between dimensions. He muttered about illusion magic, hand on his katana hilt. Then a voice rang from every direction. Melodic, a kingly familia. My lord Ursilium. The moment that name was spoken, Zenota's heart stopped. An overwhelming pain detonated inside his skull. The cosmic seals suppressing his memories had cracked, resonating with this white dimensional space. Billions of years of universal history flooded his mortal brain. The first Big Bang, the dance of galaxies, divine wars, his throne in zenith, the suffocating boredom. Everything came back. His memories as the supreme God fully restored. Before him, stardust gathered and took form. Mencilia, galaxy gown, translucent wings glowing with aurora. She knelt, welcoming him back with trembling elation. But instead of a warm greeting, the temperature plummeted to absolute zero. The white void began fracturing with cracks of darkness. Zenota's hair bleached blazing white. His eyes ignited with blinding gold. Behind his human frame, a colossal silhouette of pure energy appeared, so vast it made reality buckle and weep. Mencilia went white as ash. She'd never seen him this angry. He roared about how she dared interfere. He'd abandoned his throne because he was suffocated by ease. He'd reincarnated to experience hardship, and she'd brazenly appeared in this solar system, founded a religion in her own image, manipulated the destinies of the humans around him. She'd ruined his stage, but in his blind fury, he'd forgotten something crucial. His current vessel was made of human flesh. Red fracture lines appeared across his face and arms. Blood seeped from his pores. His mortal body was being destroyed from the inside by his own power. He coughed a mouthful of blood. Mencilia's terror vanished, replaced by sheer panic. She lunged forward, caught his swaying body, wept openly, begged him to reseal his energy. The mortal vessel would be destroyed. Her warm tears fell against the back of his hand. Hearing that raw heartbreak, his logic slowly reclaimed dominion over his fury. The colossus faded. His eyes dimmed back to black. His hair returned to dark. He sank down, breathing ragged, staring at his blood-coated hands. Reality struck him. In this body, divine-level rage was poison aimed at himself. He looked at Mencilia, weeping and blaming herself. An emotion foreign, yet wholly human rose in his chest. Guilt. In Zenith, he'd never apologized to anyone. But here, he just caused pain to the being who'd cared for him since the beginning of creation. With bleeding hands, he placed his palm gently on her head and stroked her hair. "Forgive me, Mencilia." She sobbed that the fault was hers. He gave a faint, genuine smile. But what was done couldn't be undone. She'd become the creator goddess in the eyes of this planet's people. They worshipped her, placed their hopes in her. He issued his new decree. As a goddess, she carried responsibility. Watch over those who revered her. Ensure Earth's balance wasn't broken by darkness. And don't neglect her primary duty, maintaining balance in Zenith. She'd have to divide her consciousness between both. Mencilia's expression brightened. The burden wasn't punishment. It was absolute trust. As long as she was permitted to watch over his existence. Dividing consciousness to protect two realms was a price so small it barely registered. Then Zenota did something that made her eyes fly open. The former supreme god bowed slightly. As an ordinary person, he asked her to bless his life, Goddess Mencilia. Mencilia froze. Her cheeks flushed vivid red. To be addressed as a goddess by the supreme, God himself produced a euphoria she had no words for. She returned the bow with immaculate grace, vowing to bless his every step with absolute perfection. Back in Kagan Church, the spatial tremors ceased as abruptly as they'd started. The instant Zenota returned to reality, The full physical toll hit. He vomited blood and collapsed. Karam and Zerial lunged, catching him. Sister Nyana came running, face white as the altar cloth. These injuries originated from inside his own body. Lanaya and Nyana fused their healing magic, repairing ruptured blood vessels. 15 minutes later, the bleeding stopped. Zenoda opened his eyes to pale, anxious faces. Anisha punched his shoulder, gently with tears in her eyes. Nyana asked what happened. He needed an elegant lie. He forced a composed, sage-like smile and said he'd received a direct spiritual trial from the goddess herself. Her sacred power was too immense entering his body. Receiving an absolute blessing from heaven required significant struggle and pain. The explanation was reverent, internally consistent, and impossible to disprove. Everyone stood with mouths open. He redirected quickly. Stop worrying about me. While their spiritual connection with the goddess was strong, the four of them should go up to the altar. Ask Sister Nyana to bestow a special blessing on their new weapons. At the words blessing on their weapons, Zerial's and Karam's eyes lit up immediately, their panic evaporating on the spot. Really? They could get holy blessed weapons, like Zenoda's sword? Of course, Zenoda turned to Sister Nyana, who was still standing motionless. Please help them, Sister Nyana. With a heart full of conflicting emotions, Sister Nyana finally nodded. One by one, the legendary weapons forged by the Kagan blacksmith were laid upon the altar. Nyana began the purification rite. And true to what might be expected, given that Mencilia had just made a solemn vow to her cilium to fulfill her divine duties with absolute perfection, the blessing that descended that day was extraordinary. Radiant white light wrapped around Karam's shield, Zerial's daggers, Lanaya's staff, and Anisha's staff in turn, imbuing each weapon with a permanent magical attribute that left them all glowing with a soft, steady luminescence. Satisfied that everything had been resolved, Zenoda felt the last of his unfinished business in Kagan finally come to a close. After expressing their deep and heartfelt gratitude to Sister Nyana, the five young people walked out of the chapel together. Outside, the morning sun shone bright and clear, as though washing away the last traces of the long night's tension and terror. 5 saddled horses, fully loaded with provisions and supplies, were waiting for them in the front yard. Zenoda swung up into the saddle, feeling no lingering pain thanks to the combined healing of Lanaya and Nyana, and turned to look back one last time. The journey from Kagan to Korsun stretched hundreds of kilometers through the Wrathwood, past steep ravines, across land belonging to no one. Karam suggested hiring a wooden cart for their heavy supplies. 2 horses pulled the cart, 3 more tied as reserves. The strangest sight was their leader. Zenoda wasn't riding or sitting in the cart. He walked at a steady rhythm that always kept pace alongside the plodding cart. Anisha called from the window, telling him to get inside, asking if his feet were blistered. He smiled and said he wasn't tired. It wasn't a heroic lie. Walking across a continent on foot was the most effective method of conditioning his human vessel to this world's gravity and mana density. After the church incident, where his body nearly exploded from cosmic rage, he understood his frame needed relentless tempering. Ironically, the ones needing rest most often were the horses. On the 3rd day in the Wrathwood, they were ambushed by shadow weavers, mutated spiders the size of ox carts launching paralyzing venom webs. 8 of them. Zenoda simply stepped back, leaned against the cart, and crossed his arms. Show me what a year of training is worth. All 4 students moved into combat formation with reflexive coordination. Karam activated Iron Body, absorbing the charge of 2 massive spiders without shifting a centimeter, then bisecting one cleanly. Zerial moved like a phantom through the canopy, blessed daggers severing spider legs with contemptuous ease. Anisha swept a broad fan of flame across the right flank, incinerating 3 spiders and clearing the path. Under 5 minutes, 8 Class C monsters that would normally require a dozen veterans were reduced to carcasses by 4 teenagers. Zenoda smiled with quiet satisfaction. He hadn't needed to lift a finger. By the fifth day, the massive trees thinned. Full sunlight returned, but the sight ahead was far from welcoming. A slum village, rotting wood buildings, riddled rooftops, dirt roads littered with refuse. Hollow-eyed elderly people and children with distended bellies, the telltale mark of severe malnutrition. They peered through gaps in shut doors with fear and suspicion. Anisha whispered that the air was desolate. No proper field, no usable well. Then, without a sound, a small silhouette burst from behind empty barrels. A child, painfully thin in filthy rags. Eyes locked onto Zenoda's katana. To that poor child, the beautiful sword handle looked like a fortune large enough to buy food for months. Zerial's instinct caught it. He moved to intercept, but Zenoda calmly raised one finger, signaling everyone to hold. He let the child come. Let small, trembling fingers close around the scabbard. But the instant skin touched the blessed sheath, the mana was too pure and dense for a body in severe starvation. The child's eyes rolled white, and the small body crumpled against Zenoda's legs. No anger in his eyes, only quiet, deep sympathy. He ordered Karam and Zerial to unload supplies and set up 2 large tents on the open ground near the ruins of a small shrine. They leaped into motion at once, driving in iron stakes and stretching out heavy canvas with practiced speed. Zenoda then bent down and lifted the child's weightless body with both arms and turned toward the girls. Lanaya, come with him to the tent. This child was suffering from severe malnutrition and mild mana shock. Use the low-tier recovery spell slowly. They didn't want to shock the internal organs. Lanaya ran after Zenoda into the half-erected tent, immediately beginning to chant a soft healing spell that glowed a warm, dim green. The ground here was completely arid, and the horses needed water. In a village this barren, water was a luxury. Zenoda walked several paces to the middle of an open patch of hard, cracked earth. He sank into a low stance and concentrated a small measure of his physical strength into his right fist. Told everyone to step back a little. He drove his fist into ground. A blunt shockwave radiated outward, blasting the hard-packed earth upward and outward into a circular crater roughly 5 meters across and knee-deep on an adult. Karam and Zerial had to shield their faces from the spray of flying dirt. Without pausing, Zenoda extended his hand toward the crater. Water magic, Grand Spring. A powerful surge of clean, clear, fresh water burst from his palm, flooding the large hollow in a matter of seconds. The dry crater became an improvised pool that caught and reflected the afternoon sunlight. The thirsty horses whinnied in delight, and Zerial immediately led them over to drink from the far edge. He called to Anisha, who was still staring open-mouthed. Get the large iron pot and the wooden container from his pack. Collect clean water from the pool before the horses muddied it. Use her fire magic to heat the water. Lanaya would need it for warm compresses. And could she cook something for them tonight? A warm meat broth, perhaps? At that, Anisha's face lit up with an eager grin. As an adventurer, she had developed genuine cooking skill. Leave it to her. They still had plenty of horned rabbit from the forest border yesterday. She'd make the most warming, stomach-settling broth they'd ever tasted. The makeshift camp hummed to life. Karam got the main fire going. Anisha chopped meat and herbs, carefully managing the flame beneath her pot with her element magic. Zerial kept watch at the camp's perimeter, making sure no more desperate villagers crept too close. That night, the child woke. Panic, hands checking all fingers still attached. Then the smell of rich meat broth hit. Their distended belly answered with a mortifying rumble. Zenoda sat cross-legged by the fire, stirring soup. When he heard the rustle, he turned, filled a bowl generously, told the child to come out and eat. The child stepped out on unsteady legs, fear paramount. But hunger was considerably larger than fear. The child sat down facing Zenoda, accepted the warm bowl. But something unexpected happened. Rather than diving in, the child began to cry. Tears streaked down dirty cheeks. If they ate this alone, their father and mother in that shack would starve tonight. Every teenager around the fire went still. Lanaya covered her mouth with tears. The child looked up at Zenoda with raw desperation. Sorry for trying to steal. Please don't kill them yet. Parents haven't eaten in 4 days. Father badly injured. Needed something to sell. Zenoda asked their name. Uema. He promised that their parents would have food tonight, too. Whatever Uema had been holding together gave way entirely. Sobbing, the child devoured the hot broth. Later, Uema told what happened. A year ago, a large bandit group called the Bloody Tusk built a base in the rock cliffs. They raided everything, blocked the river's dam, hanged every messenger the village sent out. Some young men joined the bandits, just so their families could survive. Anyone who resisted was killed. Uema's father was beaten with a sledgehammer for hiding a small sack of cassava. Zerial let out a sharp, contemptuous breath. Bandits? Or the royal guards? Why wasn't this reported to the nearest adventurers' guild? Uema sobbed that they tried. But every messenger the village sent out was found the next morning, hanged from the village gate. The bandits were so many. They'd made the village their territory. Every harvest season, they raided everything. They'd blocked the river's dam, so the village had no clean water unless they bought it from the bandits at prices no one could afford. The atmosphere around the campfire transformed. Anisia's grip tightened on her staff, fury blazing in her eyes. Lanaya wept quietly, unable to bear imagining what this village had endured. Karam ground his teeth together with an audible sound, his jaw set like iron. Zerial fixed his gaze on the dark silhouette of the Rocky Mountain cliffs with the cold, still look of an assassin choosing a target. But the most quietly terrifying reaction came from Zenoda, who hadn't moved. The temperature around the fire dropped sharply. The flames dimmed as though instinctively afraid. Deep in the most fundamental part of himself, something detonated. Rage. But not the cosmic rage of Ursilium. This was human anger. The anger of Zenoda Blanco. His human heart was an open revolt at the sight of mortal creatures crushing the weak out of selfish greed. The night wore on with cold wind. After the unspoken declaration of war, not one student showed any sign of backing down. Zenoda said they couldn't strike blind in the dark. They'd move at first light. Everyone slept. Outside beside dying embers, Zenoda sat cross-legged, eyes wide open. Since the church incident, his mortal body was undergoing extreme adaptation, restructuring bone density and neural pathways. Every sense millions of times more acute. Sleep entirely unnecessary. Uema appeared from the tent, unable to sleep, afraid it was all a dream. She asked why they were helping. They had nothing to give in return. She'd even tried to steal his sword. Zenoda pressed his palm gently to her head. In this world, not everything needed a reason. Sometimes a person acted simply because their heart told them it was the right thing to do. He looked up at the stars and gave her his word. He and his friends would protect her, her parents, every person in the village. Even if a giant meteor fell from that sky tomorrow intending to destroy this place, he'd destroy the meteor before it touched their ground. To Zenoda, destroying a meteor was genuinely trivial. To Uema, it was the most heroic thing she'd ever heard. She smiled for the first time in a year and went back to sleep. That night, for the first time in 12 months, the child slept without a single nightmare. At first light, they moved into the village. Zerial dropped 3 lookout bandits in under 2 seconds, pommels to nerve clusters, without a word. They reached the bandit stronghold, a 2-story building with sharpened stake barricades and a ragged flag. Inside, 30 bandits holding a morning feast on stolen food. Zenoda walked to the front, set his stance, and channeled a fraction of his transcendent physical strength into the tip of his boot. His kick hit the iron-bound teakwood gate like a siege cannon. The door didn't swing open. It was annihilated off its hinges, launching through the air like a deadly projectile. Inside, the bandit leader had been drinking ale from a barrel. The door struck him dead on, obliterated a table, pinned him against the far wall, cracking it. Multiple ribs snapped. He crumpled in critical condition from the opening move alone. Horror-stricken silence. 30 bandits stared at their leader buried under the door. Then all 30 charged. Zenoda stepped aside and told his students to handle the rest. The instruction was met with a savage grin from Karam. With pleasure. Karam activated Iron Body and swung his tower shield like a millstone. The first 3 bandits to reach him were hurled through the air, noses shattered by the impact of the shield. Zerial used Karam's broad back as a launch point, leaping up to the ceiling and catching himself on the wooden roof beams. From above, he dropped into the middle of the crowd, his daggers finding weak points with surgical precision. Hamstrings, wrist tendons, the back of knees. He moved too fast for the amateur bandits' eyes to track. Anisha called from outside the doorway. She leveled her phoenix staff into the room, but knew she couldn't use a large-scale fire blast in an enclosed space without hitting her own teammates. She adjusted her spell accordingly. Flamebind. Spiraling whips of fire lashed out from her staff tip, coiling around weapons and arms, causing men to scream and drop their blades from the searing heat. Any bandit who slipped through Anisha's whips and tried to launch arrows at Karam from range found Lanaya's staff already raised and waiting. Holy Shield. A small barrier of light manifested directly in the projectile's path, deflecting the arrows effortlessly. The fight was entirely lopsided from the first second. It was not a battle. It was a one-sided dismantling of 30 veteran bandits by 4 novice adventurers. The team worked with perfect synergy, moving like the limbs of a single living creature. Zenota didn't bother drawing his sword. He leaned against the ruined doorframe and watched the product of a year's hard work prove itself beyond any doubt. In under 10 minutes, every member of the Bloody Tusk lay immobilized, bones broken or unconscious. Not one killed, but the physical damage and psychological trauma would make them retire from crime permanently. Zenota walked to the bandit leader, crouched down, and released a single mote of his cosmic aura. To the leader's eyes, the young man transformed into a colossal death god, blotting out his entire field of vision. Absolute terror tore through his sanity. His heart hammered so violently it nearly stopped. The air around him felt as though it had vanished entirely. Zenota told him to listen carefully. You filthy rat. Gather whatever life he had left and order his men to leave this village. Now, never come back. Never rob anyone again, anywhere he went. If he ever heard the name Bloody Tusk again, he'd find him, and he'd make certain that death was something the man begged for on his hands and knees. The bandit leader urinated on himself. He could not speak, only nodded in short, broken jerks of his head, his entire body shaking with an inexpressible, all-consuming terror. He used the last of his strength to raise a trembling hand and signal his still-conscious subordinates. Leave. Carry him. Run. Every bandit still capable of standing immediately grabbed their unconscious comrades and hauled them toward the door. They crawled, they wept, they fled the building in a chaotic stampede, pouring out of the village like a pack of dogs that had been thoroughly beaten. In under an hour from sunrise, the terror that had strangled that wretched village for an entire year had been pulled out by the roots. The village was free, but eliminating the criminals was only half the promise. The village was liberated but still starving. For a full week, Zenota's team delayed their journey to carry out massive reconstruction. Zenota drove his fist into the earth to excavate craters, then used high-tier water magic to create permanent springs. 3 deep wells, and 1 large pond that would never run dry. Karam plowed hardened soil single-handedly. Zerial climbed damaged rooftops, repairing thatch. Lanaya ran, healing magic from dawn to dusk. Anisha kept the communal kitchen running without interruption. 1 week later, the living graveyard was full of children's laughter, newly seeded fields, and flowing wells. At the village gate, Uema wrapped her arms around Zenota's leg as tightly as she could, thanked him with eyes shining with pure admiration, said she wanted to become a strong adventurer just like him when she grew up. Zenota ruffled her hair and told her to grow into a good person. Their cart rolled forward, leaving behind a village that now had something it hadn't possessed in a very long time. Hope. 2 weeks later, the city of Corson appeared. Enormous white limestone walls 30 meters high, gilded domes, the royal castle, and the royal academy challenging the sky. The sounds of tens of thousands of lives, noble carriages, foreign spices. At a plaza fountain, They parted ways. Karam's group would find the Adventurers Guild in the Western District. Zenota would head east with Vivaldi's scholarship badge. They stacked hands in a circle, let out a cheer, and walked into their individual fates. And somewhere far above the city rooftops, beyond the clouds, a pair of crystal blue eyes watched from orbit, already composing a thorough list of ways to secretly ensure her master's path through the academy would be absolutely perfect. In Corson Square, the group from Kagan stood in a circle. The fountain behind them felt like a farewell melody. Anisha kicked pebbles sullenly. Zenota smiled warmly. They were only parting directions, not parting forever. Karam thumped his chest. No getting sentimental. They needed to register at the guild immediately. Zerial warned Zenota about arrogant nobles in the academy area. Lanaya bowed and asked the goddess's protection walk with him. Zenota said he was already proud of them. They stacked hands, let out a cheer, and parted. Karam's group headed west. Zenota turned east toward the academy spires. Walking alone through the capital, Zenota moved as lightly as the wind. The Eastern District was polished stone roads, silk boutiques, coffee houses. What caught his attention most was a spice market. The smell of cinnamon, cloves, roasting meat. Back in the village, Anisha always cooked for him. He bought spices, tea, smoked meat. Then a scream tore through the market. A woman in silk yelled about a thief. A thin man sprinted through the crowd, clutching a red velvet purse. The escape route ran directly towards Zenota. He could have driven his fist into the man's chest, but that would mean ribs as fragments and city guard questions. So he chose elegance, leaned against a stall, gathered a pinprick of water vapor from the air, compressed it to needle size with extraordinary internal pressure. When the pickpocket ran past at 3 meters, he pointed from inside his pocket. A microscopically small water bullet shot at the speed of sound, striking the nerve cluster in the man's right calf, equivalent to a nail gun at close range. The leg went numb. The man pitched face first into stone. The purse slid to stop at Zenota's boot. The pickpocket whistled. 5 more thugs emerged from alleys. The Red Jackal Gang. They surrounded Zenota with rusted daggers and bludgeons. The stockiest of the thugs snarled, spitting in Zenota's direction. Bold of him to stick his nose into Red Jackal business. Hand over the purse. Leave every coin he was carrying, and they might let him crawl home with both his legs still attached. The frightened market-goers backed away immediately, forming a wide, open ring. They stared at Zenota with expressions of pity, certain that the poor young man was going to die on this spot. Zenota's face, however, showed not the slightest ripple of emotion. He turned the velvet purse over idly in his left hand, then regarded all 6 men with the expression of someone noticing flies on his lunch table. They were ruining his morning. All 5 thugs lunged simultaneously from every direction. Zenota didn't move backward. His right hand shifted to his left hip, fingers closing around the handle of his katana. He did not draw the blade. The hard, magic-blessed ebony scabbard was more than sufficient for this. He dropped into a slight lean, ducking under an iron bludgeon, swinging in from the right, then rotated his hips. The tip of his scabbard connected with the stocky thug's jaw with surgical precision. The sound of bone fracturing rang out clearly, and the big man dropped with his eyes rolling white. Without pause, Zenota used the momentum of his rotation to step directly into the center of their encirclement. The second thug thrust at Zenota's side. Zenota deflected the arm with the back of his hand and drove the katana's iron pommel straight into the man's solar plexus. The second thug folded to his knees, unable to draw breath. It was not a fight. It was a recital of high-discipline combat technique. Zenota moved through the afternoon like a ghost in broad daylight. Every swing of his scabbard found an absolute weak point. Temple, nape of the neck, the nerve behind the knee. He was careful to calibrate his divine strength with precision, ensuring the damage was enough to shut down their nervous systems without killing any of them. In under 10 seconds, all 5 of the fearsome-looking thugs were piled on the stone road, unconscious and completely without resistance. The market fell silent. People who had been preparing to run now stood frozen with their mouths open. An ordinary-looking young man had just dismantled the most feared pickpocket gang in the district without casting a single spell or drawing his sword. He returned the purse to its owner, a woman in her mid-30s dressed in an impeccably elegant silk gown, pearl jewelry at her throat. Her face was pale from shock and the effort of chasing the thief. He politely extended the red velvet purse. "Ma'am," he believed this was hers. The woman accepted it with trembling hands. She checked the contents quickly, then let out a long breath of relief. "May the gods and goddesses bless him, young man." Everything was still here. Inside this purse were her husband's important trade documents, not merely gold coins. If this had been lost, they would have faced serious consequences. Then her husband came running. Master Vivaldi. The merchant Zenoda had saved from the ironclad bear attack months ago. Vivaldi nearly burst into tears. Zenoda had saved his life in the forest, and now his wife and business in the capital. Called him a guardian angel sent by the goddess. Vivaldi insisted on putting him up at the Silver Swan Inn, a VIP room paid for a full year. Zenoda finally entered his room. Plush four-poster bed, balcony, porcelain bathtub. He looked at his reflection. The journey had changed him. Then his mortal body sent a signal he couldn't dismiss. His soul's assimilation had reached stable equilibrium, and the body was demanding its biological due. A wave of purely human fatigue rolled over him. So this was what it felt like to be sleepy. The sensation felt surprisingly liberating. He lay back and within seconds dissolved into dreams. When a supreme god sleeps, his soul doesn't disappear into empty subconscious. A cosmic bell sounded. He stood in the white void dimension again. Mencilio waited, composed in her galaxy gown. She'd summoned him to deliver a warning about the mortal world. As the creator goddess, she could feel the flow of destiny and karma enveloping the continent. Corson was not as peaceful as it appeared. A seed of darkness had taken root deep beneath the city. Not a demon king invasion or ancient dragon resurrection. This was darkness of humanity's own creation. Ambition, greed, corrupted magic. She couldn't perceive specific details since he'd sealed his omniscience authority so he could experience genuine surprise. But she could confirm one thing. In the near future, a great calamity would come to destroy the kingdom's foundations from within. Rather than anxiety, the corner of Zenoda's mouth curved upward. A calamity. Shadow conspiracies. This was the essence of being human in a mortal world. He hadn't reincarnated to sit quietly drinking tea. If they intended to ruin his stage, he'd personally pull their greed out by the roots. Mencilia smiled. He told her good work. Keep watching over the balance. A flush of pure happiness spread across her cheeks. Morning sunlight pressed through curtains. Zenoda woke refreshed. His first mortal sleep had been the final piece of his body's adaptation. Vivaldi arrived with breakfast and good news. The scholarship registration was complete, but Zenoda still had to sit the open entrance examination. It covered theory, mana affinity, and physical combat. Zenoda concealed that this mortal examination was, in his honest assessment, little more than a minor formality. He spent the week walking the capital. His feet carried him to the central church of Corson, an enormous white cathedral with stained glass windows depicting Mencilia. He was turning to leave when his eye caught a familiar silhouette. In the courtyard, among young priests distributing bread to the homeless, stood Lanaya. Their parting yesterday had turned out to be nothing but an illusion of space. Fate had its own methods for keeping their threads woven together. Morning sunlight caught the central church's stained glass. Lanaya came running towards Zenoda, face bright with happiness. She just finished distributing bread to the homeless. Their adventurer license examination started that afternoon. She'd come to church for the goddess's blessing first. Zenoda set his hand on her head and gave her hair a calming stroke. No reason to be nervous. They'd surpassed ordinary adventurers by a significant margin. Trust their instincts, maintain formation, never drop their guard. Lanaya bowed deeply and ran off. Zenoda had 6 free days before the academy exam. He spent them walking the city, learning its layout, sampling street food. By late morning, he'd wandered into an upscale district. Near a Pegasus fountain, a crowd had gathered. A woman sobbing in desperation stopped his feet. In the center stood a commoner couple. The young woman on her knees crying, her partner shielding her with outstretched arms. Facing them, a young nobleman in wine-red silk with an arrogance so complete it had become its own ugliness. Lord Valerius. Behind him, two knights in full plate armor. Valerius was demanding the commoner's betrothed as his personal attendant. The man refused, trembling but resolute. They were to be married next month. Valerius laughed. A noble title was the law itself. He ordered his knights to kill the man and drag the woman to his carriage. The knight drew his long sword, raised it high, swung downward at full force. The end never came. A deafening impact. Sparks flew. From somewhere no one could identify, a black-haired young man now stood directly in front of the couple. Zenota had moved at invisible speed. He hadn't drawn his katana. He'd simply used the ebony scabbard to intercept the steel swing. The knight's killing blow stopped by a wooden sheath without so much as a scratch. Before the knight could react, Zenota pivoted and released two consecutive kicks on both knights' chest plates. Metal caved inward. Both soldiers hurled 5 meters into a wall, crumpling unconscious. Silence fell like a hammer. Valerius went rigid. His cane dropped. Zenota fixed him with eyes cold as polar ice. A killing aura seeped from his body, making the air heavy. He pointed the ebony scabbard tip at the junction of Valerius's throat, less than a millimeter from skin. All humans were the same beneath their pretensions. Dare to use that inherited title to oppress anyone again, and perhaps he'd truly cut him down. His black eyes showed Valerius an abyss with no bottom. Fear devoured the man's reason. He let out a shriek, tripped over his own coat, and fled at full speed, leaving his unconscious guards behind. The crowd erupted in cheers. Asked his name, called him a hero. Zenota took a reflexive step back, slightly overwhelmed. Well, doing his plan of staying invisible. In the middle of the crowd, nobody noticed that from a tea-house balcony, a pair of sharp eyes had been watching the entire scene with calculated interest. A young woman in a gray cloak, hair the color of permanent snow. Sapphire blue eyes. She wasn't watching as heroism. She was analyzing. Not the slightest mana fluctuation when he kicked. No physical enhancement magic. He deflected a steel sword using only a wooden sheath without shifting his center of gravity by a millimeter. That person was not ordinary. She placed a gold coin on the table and slipped away. 2 days later, Zenota lay on his bed in spectacular boredom. He hadn't left the inn in 48 hours. Word of the White Blade hero who humiliated Lord Valerius had spread through the eastern district like wildfire. Every time he stepped outside, people followed him, offered him gifts, or simply wanted to shake his hand. Several minor nobles had even tried to approach him to recruit him as a personal guard. Having no desire for the attention and wanting to avoid drawing the royal court's interest before the academy examination, Zenota had chosen to stay put. The innkeeper, under instructions from Master Vivaldi, was more than happy to deliver fine meals to his room 3 times a day, so Zenota had, in practical terms, absolutely no need to leave. Then, on the afternoon of the 3rd day, a rapid, enthusiastic knocking sounded at his door. Anisia's cheerful voice punched straight through the thick teakwood door. Zenota sat up immediately, straightened his clothes, and opened the door. In the doorway stood Karam and Anisia. Their appearance had changed significantly. They were no longer wearing their worn beginner adventure gear. They had on high-quality cloaks and light armor, with a silver badge engraved with crossed swords pinned to their left breast. Zenota smiled warmly, stepping aside. Looking at those badges, he thought he already knew whether they'd passed. Karam laughed loudly, clapping Zenota's shoulder as he entered. Passed. They didn't just pass, instructor. Ziriel and Lanaya had shattered the time record in the Labyrinth trial. The guildmaster was so impressed that all 4 of them were advanced directly to rank B. That was an extraordinary achievement for first-timers. Well done, all of them. Where were Ziriel and Lanaya? Why were only the 2 of them here? Anisia plucked an apple from the fruit basket on Zenota's desk and bit into it. Zerial was gathering information at the black market, and Lanaya was restocking their holy remedy supplies. They came here because, well, with these shiny new rank B badges, they suddenly received a high-priority escort mission offer from the palace. At the east gate, a royal carriage waited. The door opened. A voice cold and carrying quiet authority said she was not a pampered noble who wanted to play. She was here to seek a real fight. From inside stepped a young woman in silver blue leather combat armor, hair the color of clean, permanent snow, sapphire blue eyes radiating sharp intelligence and absolute chill. The same woman from the tea house balcony. Zenoda's breath paused slightly. Their eyes met. For several seconds, time suspended between them. Not hostility, mutual intrigue. Anisha hurried to introduce Zenoda as their evaluation consultant. Princess Alera looked him over without subtlety. She'd been curious about someone not ordinary. She permitted his presence. Zenoda dipped his head, just enough for formality and nothing more. Alera turned toward the forest. Her objective was testing her elemental magic against crimson apes. His role was evaluation only. Let's see whether his eyes were as sharp as his sword. Deep in the crimson forest, it didn't take long. A troop of crimson apes, mutated primates the size of brown bears with venomous fangs. 3 dropped from branches directly at Alera. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath. The air plummeted past freezing. Grass turned white with crystalline frost. She opened her eyes. No staff, no lengthy incantation. Pure elemental control and hand gestures. Glacial eruption. She drove her foot against the earth. Enormous ice pillars sharp as long swords erupted at tremendous speed, skewering all 3 apes mid-flight and freezing their blood on contact. From his branch, Zenoda narrowed his eyes. Impressive. Her mana capacity was enormous. But what was truly remarkable was her temperature control. She was converting water particles in the surrounding air directly into weapons without a staff. The remaining apes charged in frenzy. She swept both hands like an orchestra conductor. Frost spears rain. Hundreds of serrated ice lances materialized and launched like a repeating crossbow, saturating the charging apes. Zenoda continued observing. Her destructive output was remarkable, but she had a consistent bad habit. Every transition from defensive to offensive magic had a gap of approximately 1.5 seconds where her mana circuit recalibrated. Against an opponent at his level, that was more than enough time to take her head 10 times over. Princess Alera had no idea her training session was being dissected by a former sovereign of the entire cosmos. Zenoda sat in absolute stillness on his branch, recording every movement from the princess below. He'd reached 2 absolute conclusions. First, a deeply fatal flaw. Despite her terrifying ice magic, there was a consistent 2-second activation delay every time she transitioned between spell types. Her mana circuit needed that time to recalibrate temperature and water particle control. For an ordinary knight or monster, 2 seconds meant nothing. For Zenoda's eyes, or an assassin of Zerial's caliber, 2 seconds was an eternity. More than enough time to take her head 3 consecutive times. The second conclusion was stranger. Her raw mana capacity was enormous, nearly comparable to Anisha's explosive reserves. Yet the energy wasn't flowing naturally. Alera had deliberately constructed an invisible dam somewhere inside her own circuit. She was suppressing her true power, whether from curse, trauma, or fear of losing control. The Alera before him was only a shadow of her actual potential. He exhaled quietly. None of his business. He had no intention of prying into a royal princess's private matters. Below, Alera lowered her hands and asked for an honest assessment. Karam pointed upward. Zenoda landed silently 5 paces in front of her. If she wanted praise, she could find that from palace flatterers. Her magic was powerful, her mana capacity above average. But in a real fight to the death against a true combatant, she'd be the first corpse to hit the ground. Anisha held her breath, but Alera didn't look angry. She demanded he explain. He walked around her in a deliberate circle, tracing her spell architecture. Every time she changed from passive defense to aggressive area attack, she had an activation delay, consuming nearly 2 seconds. For any enemy with high speed, 2 seconds was more than enough to cut her throat, burn her heart, and leave for tea before her body finished falling. Alera pushed back. That was the natural law of magic. Every mana circuit required time to alter ambient temperature. Did he honestly believe anyone could activate an entirely different spell structure without delay? Zenota gazed at the monster carcasses with maddening blankness. He was briefly reminded of how Mencilia could simultaneously cast millions of solar system annihilating spells without a millisecond's pause. But that was the realm of gods entirely. Some could, he answered casually. There were people who broke through that limitation. Circuit simplification, mental precasting, spell overlapping. Overcoming the delay was ultimately a matter caught somewhere between pure luck and raw talent. Those words landed like a silent slap. The phrase implied the celebrated genius of the royal family lacked the talent to overcome the flaw. Noble pride ignited. She stepped forward, directly challenging him. What happened if this weakness continued on an actual battlefield? Zenota held her gaze without blinking. Death. The word delivered in a tone of perfect flatness, as though reading tomorrow's weather report. To Alera, it was the highest insult ever directed at her magic. She hissed that she'd prove his mouth was all talk. Leap back 10 meters. A chill far more intense detonated outward. Frost spears rang. Hundreds of ice lances aimed at the young man, still standing with both hands in his pockets. Before the volley could descend, Karam burst from the treeline. Cover. His massive frame materialized in front of Zenota, tower shield driven into frozen ground. But a hand touched Karam's shoulder from behind. Gently, but with unmistakable finality. Zenota's voice was quiet. Not a request. Let him handle this. Karam whispered urgently that if Zenota killed her, the entire kingdom would hunt them. Zenota kept walking forward. His left hand reached for the ebony scabbard. His right hand closed around the handle. The sharp ring of a blade, leaving its sheath cut through the frozen wind. For the first time in Corson, Zenota had drawn his real sword. The blade was pure, silvery white, as though cast from compressed moonlight. Near the base, an engraving of silver wings framing a softly glowing blue diamond. A motif bearing unmistakable resemblance to Mencilia's cosmic wings. Anesia covered her mouth in panic. Zeno drew his sword. Back in the village, he'd wiped out the iron fong without unsheathing it. Was he planning to behead the princess? But Karam crossed his arms with a faint smile. Relax, Anne. The princess will be fine. That was exactly why he knew Zenota was holding back. Zenota's most terrifying technique was Aiejutsu, drawing the blade and delivering an ultra-fast strike in a single motion. If he intended to kill Alera instantly, he wouldn't have drawn the sword before moving. He'd drawn first, let his opponent see the blade, then settled into a static stance. Absolute proof he was deliberately limiting his speed and giving her the opportunity to strike first. Alera interpreted the drawn blade as absolute defiance. She thrust both hands downward. Hundreds of ice lances launched simultaneously. But Zenota finally moved. Pure footwork and perfect prediction. He wove through the barrage like a dancer in a storm. Ice spears slammed into the ground fractions of a second after he left each spot. Occasionally, he used his white sword to deflect a projectile. The blessed blade split enchanted ice like cutting warm butter. Alera canceled the remaining spears and drove both palms into the ground. The 1.5-second delay occurred. To Zenota, currently in motion, that pause felt very long. He could have taken a yawn. He continued pretending to run at normal human pace, waiting for her spell to finish forming. 3 enormous ice pillars erupted, attempting to impale him from below. He'd already read the delay and tracked her mana flow through the earth. He simply rotated, evading each with minimum motion, stepping onto the first pillar as a platform, clearing the second, landing behind the third. Every killing attack missed. Not one grazed his shirt. Alera's breathing was ragged, frustration eating her rationality. She taunted him, running like a rat, Maybe he was just accidentally fast and had been pretending to be their instructor to ride on reputation. At that cheap provocation, Zenota stopped, stood there spinning his white katana lazily, told her to trust him. If he were actually serious, it would only make her disappointed in herself. That sentence reduced her remaining patience to nothing. She committed to her fastest combined assault. 3 large ice lance projectiles from her right hand. He stepped sideways, avoiding all 3 easily. But that was the feint. The instant his foot landed where she'd calculated, she triggered a high-tier confinement spell she'd been weaving beneath the surface the entire time. Glacial prison. 4 walls of massively thick ice pillars erupted simultaneously, curving inward and locking at the top, forming a small ice tower. Zenota was sealed inside completely. Alara sank to one knee, breathing in desperate gasps. That final spell had consumed every last reserve. She laughed quietly between labored breaths. Look at who's disappointed now. The silence held, broken only by ice groaning in the wind. Then a voice answered, "Yes, you're right." The voice didn't come from inside the tower. It came from directly behind Alara's right ear. Very close, very calm. Her sapphire eyes flew open. Her heart wrenched. Someone was standing behind her. No footsteps, no shift in air. She felt something metallic, cold and unambiguously lethal, resting with feather-light precision against her throat. The white blade. Zenota stood tall behind the kneeling princess. His clothing wasn't even wrinkled. At the moment the pillars rose, his speed had created an afterimage convincing enough to deceive her eyes, while he calmly walked around the outside and positioned himself behind her. The full, incomprehensible depth of the gap between them became impossible to deny. The ego and pride of Princess Alara rose cold, shattered into pieces. Her body trembled violently. She lowered her head, closed her eyes, let the words of surrender leave her trembling lips. She conceded. The white blade slid back into its scabbard with a soft click. To Alara's ears, it rang like a judge's gavel delivering the final verdict on every piece of her pride. She remained on her knees, hollow and empty. The remainder of that afternoon passed in profound awkwardness. Alara said nothing, sat hugging her knees beneath a tree, refusing to speak, refusing to even cast ice magic to cool their drinking water. The ice genius sat alone, feeling no larger than a frog at the bottom of a well. Deep in the darkened forest, a campfire blazed. Everyone ate hungrily except Alara. Her plate untouched, eyes fixed on flames, revisiting her humiliation with unforgiving repetition. Zenota set down his plate and walked toward her. She looked up with a pointed, contemptuous look forced to conceal her shame. Asked if he'd come to laugh at her. Go ahead. Zenota wasn't irritated. He settled onto a fallen log beside her, looked at the campfire before speaking with a voice carrying the weight of something ancient. Confidence was good. Recognizing you weren't perfect was also good. But don't let that recognition become the thing that shut her eyes to something greater. This world was very wide. There would always be people better, faster, stronger. But their existence wasn't evidence that she was lesser. Defeat wasn't the end of her world. Defeat was supposed to be a lesson, a step up. Focus on what she could control, which was the work starting tomorrow to close that 2-second weakness. Not the grieving tonight. His words carried no soothing holy magic. Yet somehow they reached the foundation of her heart. The stoic perspective dismantled both her arrogance and sulking at once. She realized he'd never been belittling her. He'd simply been delivering an unvarnished lesson in reality. Her sapphire eyes softened. A genuine smile formed for the first time. She said he apparently had a mouth sharper than his sword. Thanked him. Zenota told her to eat her meat before Anisha yelled at him for letting the cooking go cold. Alara laughed softly, finally picked up her plate. The stiff atmosphere dissolved into something warmer. The following morning, they packed and headed back to Corson. At the city gate, Zenota waved casually and headed off to rest before his examination. He slept for days, letting his human vessel rest completely. The day of examination arrived. Thousands of young people gathered in the academy's grand courtyard. Zenota stood in a sea of examinees, most in noble silk, a few commoners with recommendation letters. 3 stages. Theory test, physical ability test, magic ability test. Minimum standard was 2 scores of C or higher. For Zenota, the bar was laughably low. His biggest challenge was how to avoid standing out. Theory test. Thousands sat facing parchment with lie detection spells. Zenota read the questions with profound boredom. Question 4 asked about the origin of mana particles and their relationship with star constellation rotation. As the god who'd created the universe, he knew the theory taught in textbooks was riddled with logical errors. If he wrote the actual truth, the examiners would conclude he was deranged. So he imposed complete restraint, deliberately wrote textbook standard answers, left several questions blank or half-correct. No desire for an A. Physical ability test. Strike a large magic monolith that displayed destructive force. If he used even 1% of his transcendent physical strength, the monolith would be dust and a shockwave would level half the academy. He needed to replicate the punch force of a moderately hard-working teenage farmer. He relaxed every muscle until he felt genuinely feeble and swung in the most deliberately amateurish way. A dim green glow. Below average impact force. The examiner called next with disinterest. Zenota exhaled with quiet relief. Magic ability test. The most critical stage. Channel innate mana into a resonance crystal that shifted color by elemental affinity. Concealing his cosmic mana ocean was a challenge of entirely different scale. He sealed, locked, and chained 99.9999% of his absolute energy. Allowed precisely 1 drop to leak through, manipulated to present as unremarkable water element. The crystal flickered with hesitation. A pale washed-out blue, so dim it barely illuminated his own face. Several nobles laughed contemptuously. The examiner dismissed him with a wave, carrying all the warmth of shooing a fly. Zenota smiled inwardly. His mission of restraint had succeeded with flying colors. That afternoon at the announcement board, he found his name near the bottom of the safety margin. Theory B, Physical C, Magic D, accepted. The most perfectly calibrated result for being noticed by absolutely nobody. Then Alara appeared in her Academy Noble Track uniform, snow-white hair in clean, soft waves. She pointed at his scores with enormous satisfaction. After all those philosophical speeches and that terrifying white sword, his scores were catastrophic. Magic D? She wasn't sure the Academy still awarded marks that low. She displayed her own results. Theory A, Physical C, Magic A. 2, as one of the top students. Zenota said wow in a tone of such monumental deliberate monotony, it could have described paint drying. Alara's triumphant smile faltered. She stepped closer, closing the distance. Whispered that she knew very well what he was capable of. Why was he hiding? Why deliberately look like a failure? Zenota placed both hands in his pockets. This academy was a place for learning, growing from not knowing toward understanding. He came here because he wanted to learn. If he obliterated every test with perfect scores, what was the point of attending school? No challenge. Teachers flattering him. Nothing learned except how to be bored. To Alara, who'd felt the terror of his ability firsthand, it made complete sense. This young man had no interest in worldly validation. He simply wanted to enjoy the process. Her suspicion faded. She said she'd tolerate his little performance. But if he caused an embarrassing scene inside those walls, she wouldn't acknowledge him as a worthy opponent. She glanced back over her shoulder with a thin, genuine smile. See you in class, Zenota Blanco. Zenota looked at the academy gate. His plan to quietly enjoy a peaceful mortal experience appeared to be proceeding smoothly. But he hadn't forgotten Mencilia's warning. A calamity was watching Corson from somewhere in its shadows. His divine instincts told him the days inside this academy would turn out to be far more soaked in conflict than answering theory questions on parchment. He straightened his collar and stepped through the enormous gates. The new life of the cosmic god as an ordinary student had at last begun. Zenota Blanco officially became a Corson Academy student. The former Supreme God now wore the standard dark gray jacket with cross-shield emblem. His new life began, and for Zenoda, the days at the academy were an exceedingly refreshing comedy. He committed wholeheartedly to his role as the low-achieving student who scraped through by luck. In Professor Gauld's Continental History class, the man's droning monotone functioned as a sleeping spell considerably more potent than any actual magic. Zenoda, who'd lived billions of years and understood the true mechanics of creation, found mortal history profoundly dull. He folded his arms and fell sound asleep. A piece of chalk launched at high velocity struck his forehead. The class erupted in laughter. Zenoda woke, rubbing his reddening forehead, yawned, smiled with a pleasantly vacant expression. In his previous life, meteors would disintegrate before grazing his skin. Getting hit by mortal chalk was genuinely an exotic experience. In basic elemental magic practice, students demonstrated destructive capability against wooden dummies. Nobles launched fireballs and wind spears, shattering dummies into splinters. Zenoda stepped forward, concentrated his allegedly D-tier water mana, and directed his hand toward an empty wooden bucket near the instructor's feet. A gentle, peaceful stream trickled from his fingers, filled the bucket to the brim, and stopped. The instructor's eyebrow twitched, told him to attack the target, not fill a bathtub. Zenoda apologized with total innocence. His water capacity was quite small. If he forced it into an attack, he'd pass out. He thought filling the bucket might be useful for extinguishing leftover flames. Several girls giggled. The instructor marked Zenoda's name at the absolute bottom of the scoring sheet. In close combat duel practice, his opponent, a large-bodied noble, charged and slashing wildly. Zenoda didn't counterattack, didn't block, simply moved backward, stepped aside, ducked by half a centimeter, tilted a shoulder by the smallest margin. Every strike missed by a hair, cutting only air. He jogged in a leisurely circle like an eel coated in grease, occasionally scratching the back of his head. His opponent screamed at him to stop running and fight. Zenoda answered pleasantly that he was fighting. Specifically, fighting by not letting the other man win. The duel went to time. The noble collapsed from exhaustion, while Zenoda hadn't produced a single drop of sweat. The instructor asked what manner of fighting style that was. Absolute survival technique. If the enemy couldn't hit him, he didn't die. The instructor could only drag a hand across his face and call a draw. Being the entertaining underachiever was considerably more enjoyable than being a genius crushed by expectations. 1 month passed in peaceful monotony, until Faizura, a curly-haired classmate with round glasses and a remarkable talent for gathering gossip, dropped into the seat across from him in the cafeteria. The first-year cohort was holding a joint field exercise combined with the senior elite class. 3-day survival examination in the Crimson Forest. Groups of 4. 3 first years plus 1 senior as guide. 2 days later, dozens of carriages transported students to the forest boundary. But it wasn't the monsters drawing excitement. It was the row of senior elite students waiting for them. And standing at the very front, snow-white hair and a high ponytail, was Ilera Rosecold. Zenoda's brow furrowed. She'd sat the entrance exam alongside him just a month ago. Why was she wearing a senior elite badge? Faizura whispered that her scores were so far beyond normal scale that the academy elders placed her directly in the senior elite class, skipping 2 full levels. A genuine phenomenon. Zenoda pressed his hand to his forehead. Of course. No wonder he hadn't seen her in regular classes. At that moment, Ilera turned. Her sapphire eyes swept across the first-year line until they locked exactly onto Zenoda's. A smile formed on her lips, so thin it was almost invisible. Zenoda's instincts began ringing like an alarm. His gut told him his peace was about to expire. The dismissal came. Form groups of 3 first years, then approach a senior for a guide. Chaos erupted as students scrambled for the strongest allies. Zenoda simply leaned against a tree, hands in pockets, watching the sky. He had no team. Nobody wanted Blanco, the student who ran away during duels and whose magic could only fill a bucket. He heard every word and felt nothing. With this reputation, he'd probably be left alone or assigned to sweep tents, which sounded considerably more relaxing. That hope vanished when he spotted two students near supply crates, both unchosen. Ryan, a solidly built young man with a dented metal shield. Sylvie, a small girl with thick glasses and a cracked healing staff. Both turned away by every group. Zenoda walked over. If they didn't mind joining a group of completely useless people like him, they could form a party. 3 members, complete formation. Ryan and Sylvie's eyes lit up like they'd seen a guardian angel. Their formation was complete. It didn't need a senior. Then that ice-cold voice cut through the camp's chatter. Alara rose-cold, walked with graceful stride, parting the sea of students. She stopped squarely before Zenoda. Every group must have a senior elite guide. Since his group didn't have one, she would join as a volunteer. The declaration landed like a thunderclap. Princess Alara? Voluntarily joining the worst party in the first-year cohort? Heated rumors erupted. Zenoda closed his eyes and pressed 2 fingers to his temple. His premonition had come true. The month of peace he'd carefully constructed lay in complete ruin. Alara registered formally, then leaned in and whispered that he'd deceived her at the entrance exam. Been pretending to be hopeless for a month. For the next 3 days in the forest, she wouldn't let him be lazy for a single moment. Zenoda understood immediately. She hadn't come to help. She'd come to expose him. This was going to be a very long 3 days. In a shaded corner, 3 noble students watched. Lord Cedric, son of the Grand Duke, squeezed his sword handle until his knuckles turned white. Why would Princess Alara lower herself to join the same group as trash like Blanco? His 2 subordinates suggested that the Crimson Forest was very wide and dangerous. Many accidents could happen. A cold, lethal smile spread across Cedric's face. If Blanco disappeared into the stomach of a crimson ape, the princess would have no choice but to join their group. Let's make sure that presumptuous young man never walked out of that forest alive. 1 hour later, the great horn blew. Hundreds of students poured into the dense trees. Zenoda's group walked at the very back. Ryan ahead with shield high. Sylvie in the middle, clutching her staff with trembling hands. At the rear, Zenoda and Alara walked side by side. She asked what his plan was for acquiring their first Crimson Core. Filling a bucket with water until the monster drowned? Zenoda answered without changing expression. Ryan and Sylvie would work hard. She would freeze the monsters. He would keep their pack safe in a nice shaded spot. Alara clenched her fist against the urge to say something very sharp. Their footsteps carried them deeper into the Crimson Forest, toward the zone where danger and the dirty scheming of noble-born students were already waiting in the shadows beneath blood-red leaves. Alara laid out the arrow formation. Ryan at the lead point with his shield. Sylvie in the middle rear, concentrating healing mana on Ryan. Alara would cover the left flank with decisive strikes. Zenoda, with his allegedly D-tier mana, would cover the right flank and try not to die. He answered pleasantly. The hunt began. It didn't take long before crimson apes dropped from the branches. 4 iron-muscled apes with venom-dripping fangs. Alara froze one in seconds. Zenoda sidestepped every lethal claw with simple footwork shifts, letting the apes smash into trees and stagger themselves dizzy. But at the front, Ryan and Sylvie were completely overwhelmed. Ryan staggered back from every hit, eyes shut, blocking desperately. Sylvie's healing spell came out as a faint splash, wasting precious mana to no effect. Alara's brow drew together. Her perfectionist tendencies heated to a boil. In her eyes, Ryan and Sylvie were dead weight. She stepped forward to berate them, but a firm hand closed around her left shoulder from behind. The grip didn't look powerful, but it felt like a steel vise. Pain radiated from her shoulder. She turned with fury. Zenoda held her sapphire eyes steadily. If she felt pain from a physical grip, then consider. If the arrogance-filled scolding in her head came out right now, her words would become a hand 100 times stronger, crushing the hearts of people already fighting as hard as they could. They weren't nobles trained since childhood. They were seeing a real monster for the first time. Fear was natural. A senior's job wasn't to demolish someone's spirit when they'd fallen. It was to give them a way to get back up. Ilera went quiet. She swallowed, gave a small nod. Zenota walked over to Ryan and Sylvie. Good work for not breaking formation. Ryan said he'd just been a punching bag. Sylvie said she'd drained all her mana for a tiny scratch. Zenota crouched before them. Ryan's problem was treating his shield as an absolute wall. Every time the ape hit, its chest was open for half a second. He needed a short-range weapon. Zenota gave him his old Kagan dagger. Then he turned to Sylvie. Her problem wasn't small mana capacity. It was panic. Mana was like water. Shake the container in fear, and it spilled uselessly. He produced a thin silver chain necklace with a pendant of small silver wings framing a tiny blue crystal. A magical artifact he'd quietly assembled from condensed mana. The instant it touched her skin, a warm, calming sensation wrapped around her mana circuit. Her panic dissolved in a sharp, clean focus. As the group continued, something remarkable happened. Ryan no longer retreated in fear. When an ape hammered his shield, he pivoted and drove the dagger into its ribs from behind the shield's edge. Sylvie no longer hemorrhaged mana. With full focus from the necklace, a single, perfectly efficient minor heal sealed a scratch instantly. Ilera watched the transformation with a furrowed brow. Accused Zenota of cheating, spoiling them with high-tier artifacts. That wouldn't make them genuinely strong. Zenota laughed softly. Those items weren't tools for pampering. They were instruments of long-term torture. The dagger carried a weight curse. The more monsters Ryan killed, the heavier it became. In a month, it would feel like a full broadsword, forcing him to build muscle density far beyond human limits without ever realizing it. Sylvie's necklace was the same principle. A symbiotic parasite. If she lost composure and her mana became turbulent, the necklace would begin draining her energy. The only way to keep it glowing was maintaining absolute stability of mind and soul at all times, even in sleep. If she succeeded, her natural mana vessels would expand, and her growth would multiply many times over. Ilera was completely speechless. His training methodology transcended any curriculum she'd studied in the royal palace. He wasn't giving them fish. He was giving them a barbed iron net, forcing them to become strong enough to wield it. But the Crimson Forest never let students feel at ease for long. While resting by a stream, a wave of dark, foul-smelling mana surged from the north. The air turned hot and suffocating. Crimson apes burst from the undergrowth, but changed entirely. Eyes burning blood red, muscles swollen so violently they split the skin, dark purple-black veins across every inch, foam pouring from mouths. Then the earth shuddered. From behind shattering trees, a colossal shadow emerged. A king ape, 5 meters tall, silver-gray fur soaked with blood, eyes consumed by purple madness. On a rocky outcrop above, 3 noble students stood laughing. Lord Cedric, Lord Valerius, and another companion. Valerius held an empty glass tube. He just emptied berserker powder over the cliff edge. A prohibited substance driving monsters into uncontrollable frenzy while forcibly inducing temporary evolution. Valerius shouted down, asking whether the princess's ice magic could save them from a frenzied king ape. The enhanced king ape far exceeded anything rank B adventurers could handle. Ilera launched enormous ice pillars. The monster shattered them with a single sweep. Ryan drove himself forward with his nearly destroyed shield, while Sylvie pushed every reserve of stability her necklace allowed. Zenota let his students fight, only using the smallest currents of air magic to redirect attacks that would have been fatal, making them believe they survived on pure luck. Ilera was forced to reach into her deepest reserves. Absolute zero glacier fall. A mass of ice the size of a small house materialized and crashed onto the king ape's head. The detonation rocked the entire forest. The king ape was pinned and froze solid along with the dozen smaller apes. The fight was won, but the cost was severe. Ilera dropped to one knee, drenched in cold sweat, mana completely gone. Ryan lay flat with badly bruised arms. Sylvie on the verge of passing out. Only Zenota remained standing upright without a trace of dust. The 3 nobles descended from the outcrop. They drew high-quality steel swords, radiating elemental auras. Valerius leveled his sword at Zenoda's chest, called him a gutter rat, said his existence at the academy was a stain on the nobility. Today, thanks to the accident caused by the king ape, he'd clean that stain away. Alara, still on her knees, struggled to threaten them with the rose-cold family's wrath. Cedric laughed. Deep in the forest, academy laws meant nothing. The three nobles began closing in on Zenoda. In the center of that ring of blades, Zenoda lowered his head. His gaze shifted to the shattered glass tube near his feet. The purple powder residue carried an energy resonance that was deeply and deliberately corrupted. This wasn't petty jealousy between spoiled nobles. This was evidence that somewhere within Corson, a black organization was actively smuggling prohibited compounds with intent to corrode the balance of the world. His left hand moved deliberately toward his katana handle. He asked where they got that accursed powder. Speak, before he decided to cut their mouths off and find the answers himself. Three arrogant nobles had just realized they were not hunting a helpless student. They had woken up the real monster. The killing pressure from Zenoda made the forest feel frozen solid. Crows dropped unconscious from branches. But the three nobles didn't collapse. Not through will, but through aristocratic ego and residual mana from the purple powder suppressing their fear response. These weren't ornamental nobles. They were pure heirs of three of the most powerful magical families. Cedric of House Thundra, Masters of Lightning. Valerius of House Hinno, Deep Red-Black Fire. Agru Droman, Earth and Stone Armor. They launched a combined barrage. Lightning Spear at Thunderbolt speed. Massive Fireball consuming oxygen. Razor Earth Spikes punching from beneath Zenoda's feet. His brow furrowed. By divine logic, he could simply exhale and shatter everything. But if he struck that fireball with too much force, the shockwave would level the forest for 10 kilometers. Worse, Alara, Ryan, and Sylvie lay defenseless only a dozen meters behind him. A single miscalibration and his companions would die from his own collateral force. He had to fight humanly while managing kinetic output to absolute minimum. He launched forward, letting Earth Spikes punch through empty space. Tilted his head millimeters from the lightning bolt, letting heat char only his fringe tips. The fireball screamed in behind it. Unable to dodge sideways without sending into Ryan, he leaped and used his ebony scabbard to deflect the fireball upward into open sky. He deflected fire magic with a wooden sword sheath. Valerius screamed in disbelief. The instant his feet touched ground, he shifted to offense. Crossed 5 meters in a single blink. Too slow, he whispered directly into Cedric's ear. Swung the scabbard tip against Cedric's sword wrist, cracking the radius bone. Rotated his hips and kicked Cedric's solar plexus, launching him into a tree. Ducking below Agru's enormous stone fist, he drove his pommel into the armpit where stone armor was thinnest. Nerve network went numb. A sweep kick dropped Agru. Valerius swung in panic. Zenoda caught his sword wrist barehanded, twisted until he screamed, struck the back of his neck. In under 2 minutes, a high-tier magical battle between 3 elemental nobles ended using nothing but blunt strikes from a man who hadn't drawn his blade. Cedric coughed blood and asked why it had to be him. A commoner without lineage. And yet Princess Alara refused his protection and chose Zenoda's worthless group. Zenoda exhaled slowly. So this was because he was jealous of Alara's attention. Noble ego truly was its own variety of sickness. Valerius joined in, swearing revenge. Agru simply lay face down, offering no justification at all. Zenoda drove his scabbard tip into Cedric's shoulder, fracturing his collarbone. Told him to close his mouth. He had no interest in a love drama. What concerned him was the purple powder. Where did they obtain it? Valerius laughed a rasp like rusting iron, then reached into his pocket and smashed another glass tube of purple powder against a rock. Thick, dark purple smoke billowed outward, reeking of rot. Zenoda leapt backward, sensing kurset mana. When the wind dispersed the mist, what it revealed defied mortal logic. The 3 nobles had undergone instant mutation, transformed into something between man and monster. Cedric's hands became wolf claws with blue crackling fur. Valeria's half covered in flame-red scales with malformed wings. Agru, a living clay golem with a featureless face. Their auras were 10 times more powerful. Worse, they tapped into deranged summoning magic. A giant lightning wolf tore from a gate. A fire griffin dove from the sky. The previously frozen king ape corpse rose as an undead creature. What had begun as an academy exercise had transformed into a small-scale apocalypse. Alara forced herself to stand beside Zenoda, gripping a tree for support. So they had to hold them here. She'd force out her remaining mana. Zenoda turned to her, told her to move away. She was out of mana, breathing ragged, legs unable to support her. She refused. She was Alara Rose-Cold. She wouldn't run and leave a classmate to fight 6 lethal monsters alone. What remained of Zenoda's patience ran out entirely. The seal on his presence slipped. An absolute terrifying aura erupted from his body for a single second. Silence, and do as he said, Alara. His shout rang like cosmic thunderclap. No more, Your Highness. Only the absolute fury of a sovereign whose command was not to be questioned. Alara lurched backward as though struck by an invisible hammer. For the first time in her life, primal terror seized every cell. He told her to take Ryan and Sylvie and get as far from his line of sight as possible. If they were still standing here in 1 second, all 3 would die. Fear extinguished her last arrogance. She stumbled away, dragging the unconscious bodies, biting back tears. Once they were clear, Zenoda exhaled. His gaze became cold and empty as deep space. He turned to face the 3 half-monster nobles and 3 colossal summon creatures. His right hand closed around his katana handle. The silver-white blade was finally drawn fully. It hummed softly, resonating with the heartbeat of the god in disguise. Holy light repelled the corrupted mana. Now that no one was watching, he didn't need to bother hiding his strength. The real fight began. He met their combined charge head-on, slipping through gaps and lightning strikes, deflecting claws with surgical precision. The Crimson Forest became a landscape of fire, lightning, and shattered earth. After nearly 20 minutes of relentless blows, he saw their attack patterns degrading. He closed his eyes for a single breath, synchronized with the blade's mana, dropped into a low stance. Secret art, Silver Cleave. He launched like white light cutting through space. His speed broke the sound barrier. 3 precisely targeted slashes across the chests of all 3 mutants. The blessed blade's holy light purified the toxin from their blood. Their mutations reversed. Fur shed, scales peeled, stone crumbled. All 3 lost consciousness, fully human again, alive and free from the curse. But the 3 summoned creatures remained, raging without direction. Zenoda sheathed his sword. For destroying creatures of this mass, he needed pure destructive force. No cosmic mana, just taijutsu combined with transcendent physical capability. He launched at full force, seized the fire griffin's steel beak with both bare hands, rotated for maximum momentum, and slammed the 2-ton monster into the ground so hard it detonated into fragments. Without landing, he used the momentum to spin toward the lightning wolf. Single fist technique, mountain breaker. A punch wrapped in compressed air pressure connected with the wolf's jaw. Its head of pure electricity exploded. Last, the zombie king ape swung a fist larger than his torso. Zenoda caught it in his open palm. The earth collapsed around him in a deep crater, but his body didn't shift a centimeter. He twisted the arm, hurled the creature into the air, and drew his katana half an inch from the sheath, then snapped it back. A visible wave of compressed cutting air split the king ape into thousands of fragments. All 3 creatures obliterated in seconds. He brushed dust from his shoulder. His secret remained intact. Alara supported Sylvie on one side and steadied Ryan's shoulder with the other. They stumbled away from the battle epicenter. She glanced back with barely contained worry, hating that she was running while leaving Zenoda alone. But his absolute authority had made one thing clear. At that level, her presence would only be a liability. Back in the crater, Zenoda faced a crisis. The elemental creatures regenerated faster than his physical strikes could destroy them. Every destroyed limb was restitched by dark mana residue. His human lungs felt incinerated. His muscles screamed at movements exceeding mortal limits. He needed to sever their mana cores simultaneously. No other option. He closed his eyes and focused deep into his soul, behind millions of cosmic sealing chains. He released only a fragment, 0.000000001% of Ursilium's total power. Yet even that infinitesimal percentage was too great for mortal flesh. Glowing red fracture lines erupted across every inch of his skin. Blood burst from his pores, staining his shirt deep crimson. Pain beyond description tore through every nerve. With that fragment of divine energy flowing through his blade, he drew his katana. The world froze into extreme, slow motion. One breath, 1,000 slashes. He became a streak of white light dismantling physics. In under a single second, he zigzagged between all three colossal monsters. Thousands of illusory afterimages hung in the air. The atmosphere screamed as it was split apart. The lightning wolf and fire griffin shattered into harmless, dispersing energy. The zombie king ape was minced into a rain of shredded flesh and bone. He resheathed his sword with a snap. The instant the blade seated, the side effects hit like an invisible sledgehammer. He vomited blood. His body staggered. Fractures widened. His heart beat in chaotic arrhythmia. He came within a hair's breadth of being destroyed from the inside. Fortunately, the katana blessed by Mencilia sensed its master's suffering. Radiant white light pulsed from the handle, flowing healing energy through his body, knitting cracked skin back together. External wounds closed, but internal organs still ached severely. Breathing hard, he drove his scabbard tip into the earth for support. The three nobles were slowly regaining consciousness. The purifying slashes had restored them to human form, but the powder's residue, fading from their blood, also erased memories of the mutation. Agru, however, remembered everything. His earth element provided natural mental fortitude. He remembered the powder transforming him, madness consuming him, and Zenoda's single flash of a blade saving his life and soul. He stared at Zenoda's blood-soaked back with awe and overwhelming gratitude. But Cedric, seeing Zenoda unsteady and covered in blood, curled his lip in a cunning sneer, taunted him, picked up a branch, and hobbled forward, attempting to kindle the last traces of lightning magic. Before he could take another step, Agru stood between them, arms wide, shielding Zenoda. Cedric swung the branch against Agru's shoulder, called him a bootlicking dog from a low-ranking family, told him to move. Behind Agru, Zenoda's organs surged with pain, driving him to one knee. Cedric became smug, raised his hand to form a lightning spear. Zenoda struck his right fist into the earth with a single sharp downward thrust. A shock wave rippled through the ground. The earth beneath Cedric and Valerius split open into a 3-meter-deep pit. Both screamed as they plummeted in. Only Agru was spared, the crack lines deliberately avoiding him. Zenoda raised his head, told him to be quiet and answer his question. Where do they get the powder? Cedric refused. Zenoda snapped his fingers. Water magic pulled moisture from the air, streaming down the pit walls. He drowned them very slowly in his personal swimming pool. The water rose to their ankles. Then Agru touched his arm. Please stop. Killing them like this was beneath a human being. Spare their lives. Zenoda went still. His dark eyes searched Agru for a long moment. In an academy filled with corrupt nobles, this young man was standing to protect the person who'd just humiliated him, holding firm to basic human decency at the most critical moment. The mortal world really was full of surprises. He stopped the water flow, dropped chunks of ice into the pit to freeze the water at waist height. Told Agru he was a decent noble, hoped he'd hold on to that quality. Because Agru asked mercy for them, Agru would pay that price. Could he answer Zenoda's questions honestly? Without hesitation, Agru nodded. The substance was called Demon's Ash, the highest tier illegal magical stimulant. Cedric had purchased it at a secret auction in Corson's underground black market, using a stolen access pass from his father, the Grand Duke. The seller claimed it could increase elemental capacity tenfold. Cedric bought it, consumed by jealousy over Alara. Zenota processed the information. Deeply corrupted energy. Underground black market. A Grand Duke's connections. As a god who understood the origin of souls, he recognized a terrifying truth. Demons' ash wasn't ordinary. It was residue of absolute negative energy, stimulating and amplifying the victim's darkest impulses until those qualities consumed them and warped their physical form. If the organization behind this was whom Ancilia had warned about, their goal wasn't merely gold. They were trying to create an army of mutant monsters from inside the city's walls. And if a Grand Duke was involved, the rot had already reached the roots of the kingdom's governance. Just as he finished his interrogation, hurried footsteps approached. The head field instructor emerged with teachers and guards. Behind them, Alara ran with labor breath. Zenota immediately assumed his role, rearranging his expression into a poor young man who'd narrowly survived. He spun a story about a mutated King Ape, the noble's heroic but failed attempt to fight, and the explosion causing the ground to collapse. The instructors bought it, helped by remnants of Alara's glacier fall magic still clinging to the area. Alara looked at him with profound complexity. She knew perfectly well the monster story was fiction, but she chose to say nothing. Behind his calm expression, Zenota's mind was already assembling a new course of action. When this exercise concluded, he'd infiltrate Corson's underground black market and tear out the origin of that lethal powder by the roots. Several days passed since the Crimson Forest incident. Thanks to Zenota's fabricated story, Lord Cedric and Lord Valerius were now celebrated as brave champions on the announcement boards. The reality was considerably less glorious. They'd been found encased in an enormous ice block at the bottom of a pit, transported back in the ice, then thawed over 10 hours using low-temperature fire magic. The ordeal left them unconscious for days from extreme hypothermia, with absolutely no memory of what happened. They could only sit there shivering, confused, awkwardly accepting congratulations. Meanwhile, Zenota returned to his daily performance as a low-achieving student. In theoretical magic class, he played the role of a student struggling with basic mana circuitry. Nobody gave him a second glance. But behind his flat expression, he was enduring genuine mortal pain. The aftereffects of releasing even a tiny fraction of Ursilium's power still lingered. Every deep breath felt like thousands of invisible needles stabbing his lungs. His human vessel needed time to repair cellular damage at a microscopic level. When class ended, Physura appeared with hushed urgency. A secret message from Princess Alara. Zenota was to present himself before the king at the royal palace after school. And if he tried to run or ignore the summons, she would personally create a wanted poster with an extremely high bounty across the entire continent. Zenota's hand paused. The petty, childish threat truly tested his tolerance. He told Physura to say that if she actually dared spread that poster, he'd very much like to see what happened. Physura's courage crumbled, and he fled to deliver the insane response. From that day, a structured campaign of harassment began. When Zenota ate in the cafeteria, nobles contrived to spill soup on his shirt. Walking through corridors, a potted plant fell from the second floor directly beside his head. He sidestepped with a 1-centimeter shift and cleaned the stain with a microscopic water spell, entirely unbothered. Then the escalation intensified, for men in student uniforms surrounded him in the garden. Not students, palace soldiers in disguise. Before Zenota could consider which knees to break, a Grudroman appeared, breathing hard, and erupted a thick stone wall intercepting their charge. Positioned himself like a living barricade. The soldiers exchanged a look and vanished. Zenota watched the Gru's back. The assistance wasn't necessary, but the genuine sincerity reached something in his human side. That evening in his VIP room, Zenota sensed 3 familiar presences creeping through the corridor. He employed Taijutsu's speed. He flashed through the room's shadows, opened the balcony window, leaped out, ran along the stone wall of the inn in the darkness, and landed without sound at the far end of the corridor, directly behind all three figures. 2 seconds total. His white blade was drawn half an inch from his sheath, releasing a cold aura that locked the air against the throats of all three people simultaneously. What were they doing here? The three gray-cloaked figures flinched violently. They turned with faces drained of color. Their hoods fell back. Cedric, Valerius, and Agru. All three of them very nearly suffered cardiac arrest, finding Zenota already behind them. In unison, they threw both hands high into the air, shaking in fear and pleading simultaneously. Don't kill them. They weren't here to attack. Seeing their battered faces carrying not the slightest trace of killing intent, Zenota exhaled. He pressed the sword back into its sheath with a quiet click, then stepped past them to open his own door. Kulmin. The three nobles jostled awkwardly through the doorway before settling inside the luxurious room. Once the door was locked, complete silence fell. Zenota leaned against his writing desk, arms folded. Explain. What exactly brought the three of them to his door in the middle of the night? Cedric, ordinarily the most arrogant of them, bowed his head deeply. They knew about the harassment Zenota had been experiencing at the academy. They came to tell him that all of those incidents were arranged directly by Princess Ilera herself. She'd hired the soldiers to pressure him. And Valerius added, voice unsteady, that the king knew absolutely nothing about this. This was purely the princess acting beyond her authority. Zenota's hard edge softened marginally. These young men were foolish and arrogant, yes, but being brutally beaten by their own parents was too cruel. He told them they could stay in his room. Their parents wouldn't dare force their way into an inn rented by Vivaldi. Their eyes lit up like they'd been pardoned from execution. He opened the wardrobe to find blankets and discovered Mencilia's handiwork. A large, thick blanket knitted from exceptionally soft, silver-blue wool. A familiar, soothing fragrance drifted from it. She'd been quietly descending to earth on each of Zenota's birthdays to slip handmade gifts into his room. That foolish girl truly couldn't leave him alone. A quiet, warm smile spread across his face. He tossed the blanket to the three nobles. The moment it settled across their bodies, the cosmic healing energy subsided their whip wound pain and dissolved the cold in their bones. Within seconds, all three were snoring peacefully like infants. Even Zenota felt the trailing warmth helping him set aside his organ ache and sleep soundly. Morning arrived. The whip wounds had visibly begun to close. Zenota announced they weren't going to the academy. Going back would only invite more harassment. They needed disguises. He produced hooded cloaks. Zenota in white, the three nobles in dark gray. They slipped out the back door. What followed was an extremely absurd scene. A young man exercising considerable restraint not to destroy the world, strolling leisurely, followed by three elite nobles who'd previously wanted him dead. They spent the day like old friends. Monster meat skewers, candied apples, sitting along the riverside watching trade ships. Valerius and Cedric laughed freely for what felt like the very first time, without pretense. Being ordinary people on an ordinary street was infinitely more joyful than being locked inside their family castles. On the other side of the city, Ilera's mood was decidedly not joyful. She drummed her fingers impatiently at the library, checking Zenota's empty seat in history class. If he wouldn't come to her, she'd find him. She took an extreme approach. A high-priority, emergency, wanted poster appeared on the Adventurers Guild bulletin board. No name, only descriptions. For cloaked individuals, 1 white, 3 gray. Dangerous. Capture and deliver. Reward, 5,000 gold coins. Every experienced adventurer in the district went green-eyed. That afternoon, a dozen fully armed adventurers surrounded Zenota's group. To them, easy money. To Zenota, a mildly irritating afternoon inconvenience. He concentrated wind mana into both palms, slipped past capture nets, and launched open palm strikes wrapped in wind pressure at nerve clusters. In under 10 seconds, all 12 were piled on the ground coughing. The bound leader described the wanted poster. Zenota dragged a hand down his face. That insane princess had listed them as royal fugitives because he skipped school. They hurried back through side streets. At his door, Master Vivaldi waited with a sealed letter bearing an ice rose wax stamp. Alara had delivered it in person. The content was sharp and characteristic. Meet her tonight at the hill boundary outside Corson. Come alone, or she'd escalate from capture alive to something considerably more inconvenient. Zenota crushed the letter in his fist. His patience had reached its absolute ceiling. He secured his katana and walked out, fully intent on ending this infuriating situation once and for all. Zenota stared at the crushed letter. He reached for his katana and white cloak, but three figures blocked his path. Cedric, Valerius, and Agru, already in gray cloaks. They insisted on coming. The princess was targeting him because of them. If she intended to punish or trap him, they had to explain the truth. Agru simply raised his solid fist as a silent declaration. Zenota managed a thin smile. Do as they liked. If a fight broke out, don't die in some undignified way. Night descended. A full moon cast silver light across the dirt road outside the city gate. Zenota and the three nobles walked toward rolling grassland. Under an enormous oak tree, a figure in a deep blue cloak stood with their back to the moon. Alara turned, pulling back her hood. She wanted him to answer her father's summons at the palace. He owed the king an explanation. Zenota asked what if he refused. A thin, lethal smile formed on her lips. She raised her right hand and snapped her fingers. A dense, killing aura detonated from the tree shadows. A figure in pure black shot out like a bullet, two gleaming daggers aimed at Zenota's throat. The killing intent was powerful and genuine, but something about those daggers was deeply familiar. Wait, those daggers. Zerial. Zenota pulled back, avoiding the lethal cross slash by millimeters. The black-cloaked assassin landed with fluid precision, but beneath his hood his eyes went wide. This person in the white cloak was incredibly precise and fast. Zenota fixed Alara with a furrowed look. So she intended to kill him tonight. No, she answered with characteristic arrogance. Only to incapacitate him by force. She'd used her personal funds to hire the highest-ranked adventurers available. Several? The word had barely left his mouth when another shadow moved at tremendous speed. A blue-cloaked figure with an enormous tower shield charged like a battering ram. The force threw Zenota considerably backward, separating him from his three companions. Agru moved to help, but before Cedric and Valerius could follow, extraordinary heat and blinding flashes erupted from above. Fire and light element spells rained down, forcing both nobles to leap apart. Two female figures descended through the air on magic currents, one in deep red with wild fire spirals. Anisha, beside her, pristine white with brilliant holy aura. Linnea. Cedric and Valerius stood back-to-back in confusion and panic. Who were these insane adventurers? Their magic was genuinely terrifying. Valerius told Cedric he'd buy time. Run. Get back to the city. Cedric went completely still. In the past, they'd have elbowed each other out of the way to save themselves first. But tonight, Valerius was offering his life. Slowly, Cedric stepped forward. Not to run, to stand squarely beside his friend. He clapped his hand hard against Valerius's shoulder, showed a smile of genuine, uncomplicated pride no one had ever seen from him. Valerius was his friend. Not just him. Zenota and Agru were friends too. He refused to leave them to die alone. Running away in fear was pathetic. He'd rather die fighting beside them tonight. Valerius chuckled. Sometimes dying with friends really was the best option available. They launched forward together. Meanwhile, Zenota was locked in a sword exchange with the black-cloaked assassin. Under the full moon, exchanging blows high in the night sky, Zerial's hood blew back. Moonlight fell across his face. Zenota, who'd recognized him from the very beginning, gave him a thin, knowing smile. A smile that could only pass between instructor and student. Through that look, a wordless message. Don't hold back. Be serious. I'll match you. Zerial's shock transformed into fierce, joyful anticipation. He began fighting at full capacity, activating every skill developed since Kagan. Their combined speed was such that onlookers could only hear the constant ring of metal without following their bodies. Even Alara watched with growing awe. She'd known Zenoda was fast-fighting monsters, but this was a fight between humans. The adventurer she'd hired was one of the fastest assassins in the guild. Was this the true ability of the instructor who trained those four terrifying adventurers? While Zenoda and Zerial enjoyed their airborne sparring, conditions on the ground were genuinely desperate for Cedric and Valerius. Anisha deflected Cedric's lightning with an almost bored swing. Linnea blocked Valerius's fire attack without even bothering to dodge. Then Anisha began incanting a high-tier spell. An enormous magic circle blazed in the sky. A colossal phoenix of pure plasma fire materialized and began its dive, clearly intent on reducing both nobles to ash. High in the air, Zenoda felt the massive mana surge. If the phoenix landed, they'd genuinely die. He struck Zerial's blade with his scabbard, sending the assassin spinning back, then released a very pure, very dense, killing aura. The wave swept across the entire battlefield, striking Anisha's concentration without mercy. Her incantation broke. The phoenix dissolved into dust before touching anyone. Anisha sank to the ground, legs shaking from the terror of that killing pressure. Then Zenoda fainted towards Zerial. The blue-cloaked shield user activated cover, materializing in front of the assassin. Zenoda struck the shield with his scabbard. The impact sounded like a cannon discharge. A Gru saw his opening and struck the shield user's head, pulling back the hood. Karam, the four elite adventurers Alara had paid to capture Zenoda, were his own students. Zenoda walked toward Alara, who stood frozen near the oak tree. Her plan had collapsed completely. He told her that initially he'd intended to let her do whatever she wanted. The harassment didn't concern him, but because her arrogance dragged his own people into a problem that was never theirs, she should be satisfied with how things turned out. Reprimanded with words that precise, Alara lost every word. Her pride crumbled inward. She could only lower her head. Zenoda sighed with exhaustion. Enough. Just leave it. As it happened, he did have a matter he wanted to bring before the king. Tomorrow morning, he'd go to the palace in person with the three clownish nobles beside him. Alara's face transformed instantly. Shame swept aside by relief and genuine happiness. She was going to inform her father immediately. Zenoda rolled his eyes, promised he'd come on his own this time. She held him to it. Once the royal party disappeared, Zenoda walked toward his four students standing awkwardly in the grassland. Asked if they were all right. Zerial scratched his head sheepishly. Anisha grabbed his cloak hem, begging him never to release that aura again. She thought her heart would stop. Zenoda laughed softly and patted her head. Sorry, he had no choice. Otherwise, they'd have killed each other. The night ended with the party splitting in two. Zenoda and his three clownish nobles slipped back through the inn side entrance. Karam, Zerial, Linnea, and Anisha returned to the guild to cancel their mission and report that their target had been far too terrifying to apprehend. Back in the VIP room, the three nobles swarmed Zenoda like chicks that had lost their mother hen. They still hadn't processed the identity reveal. Demanded an explanation. How could adventurers at the level of Godwings possibly answer to him? Zenoda cracked open one eye. Told them they were louder than the red-cloaked woman from earlier. To put it simply, he was their teacher. Silence. Then a chorus of disbelief so loud he genuinely worried his window glass might crack. A student with a D in magic and C in physical was the teacher of one of the most promising adventuring parties in the capital. Their sense of reason had been thoroughly demolished. They collapsed onto the carpet, confused and out of words. Zenoda tossed Mencilia's magical knitted blanket over all three of them. Go to sleep. Tomorrow they had a far more troublesome matter. Morning arrived. Zenoda woke early and prepared a simple breakfast. The smell of toasted bread, eggs, and smoked meat soon filled the room. The three nobles slowly woke up. Although Mancilia's enchanted blanket had given their whip wounds a remarkable boost in physical recovery, they all still looked drained, dark circles ringing their eyes. Apparently, the blanket's calming effect hadn't been strong enough to fully recover their minds from the shock. All night long, they had kept replaying the fact that they had spent weeks insulting and challenging the teacher of a top-rank adventuring party. They sat at the breakfast table with the stiff, mechanical movements of zombies. While they chewed their food, the three of them whispered to one another in extremely hushed voices, careful not to be overheard by Zenoda, who was pouring tea across the table. Cedric whispered, leaning his head toward the center. Do they actually believe what he told them last night? Valerius chewed his smoked meat slowly. 50-50, completely irrational. By every academy metric, he was the worst student in their entire cohort. Agru said he believed it completely. How could he be so foolish? Cedric hissed. Agru fixed both friends with a sharp look. Had they forgotten the forest? Zenoda had cut through monsters like open air. Last night, he matched Zerial's speed midair. If Zerial himself called him instructor, who were they to argue? Cedric and Valerius fell quiet. The memory of Zenoda's white blade flashing through the air, saving their lives, replayed in their heads. Agru's logic was simply impossible to refute. While they sat lost in thought, Zenoda, who had been listening to every word of their whispered conversation thanks to his sharp divine hearing, felt a mixture of amusement and irritation. He picked up his katana, which had been leaning beside his chair. Without drawing the blade from its ebony sheath, he swung it upward from underneath. The pommel of the scabbard struck the underside of the wooden table directly in the center of their huddle. The blow carried enough force to lift the table slightly off the ground. The chins of Cedric, Valerius, and Agru struck the suddenly raised edge of the table in unison. They yelped and clutched their jaws. What was wrong with the three of them? Stop whispering like a pack of starving rats. Finish breakfast quickly. That woman would be here to collect them for the palace soon. While they whispered, Zenoda, who'd been listening to every word thanks to his sharp divine hearing, picked up his katana and swung the scabbard pommel upward from underneath the table. The blow lifted the table slightly. Three chins struck the raised edge in unison. They yelped. He told them to stop whispering like starving rats and finish breakfast. After eating, they faced a new problem. No change of clothes. Their academy uniforms were wrinkled, dust-covered, and singed. Inside his room, Zenoda opened his wardrobe and was startled by a soft golden glow. Hanging neatly inside was a long, pristine white coat of magical silk fabric. Tribal-patterned cosmic motifs in gold thread embroidered along the cuffs, collar, and shoulders. Epic yet elegant. The moment he touched it, Mancilia's soft voice resonated in his mind. She understood he'd be meeting the mortal world's highest authority. As the absolute sovereign, he must not appear ordinary before a human king. She'd sewed this coat to match his favorite garment from Zenith. It wasn't merely clothing. It was divine tier protective enchantment sewn with love. He thanked her quietly. Wearing it over his academy uniform, his entire appearance transformed. No longer a low-ranked student. He looked like an elite commander or a high-tier holy knight descended from the heavens. Noticing the three nobles' dirty clothes, Zenoda sighed and drew his sword. Pure mana flowed through the blade with a touch of water, elemental magic. A slow, sweeping motion above their heads. Microscopic enchanted water droplets fell, absorbing every trace of dust and scorch marks, then evaporating. Their uniforms were instantly spotless and pressed. The moment they stepped through the inn's front door, an elaborate scene awaited. Elite royal soldiers in silver armor. An extravagant, gold-gilded royal carriage. Princess Alara in an elegant gown. And behind her, for familiar escorts, Karam, Zerial, Anisha, and Lanaya. Zenoda rolled his eyes at the excessive ceremony. Alara greeted him formally, gesturing toward the carriage. He looked at it, then at her. No thank you. He got motion sickness from land vehicles. The single most unconvincing excuse ever uttered by a person capable of moving at the speed of light. Behind Alara, his four students exchanged bewildered glances. Their instructor got motion sick? Since when? He told her to ride in the carriage with the three nobles and his students. If she didn't agree, their meeting ended here. Alara conceded immediately with a stomped foot and a pouting expression. The carriage began rolling toward the palace. Zenoda walked alongside at an unhurried pace, flanked by Karam and Zerial. Citizens lining the streets couldn't take their eyes off him. Thanks to the white cosmic gold tribal coat and the dense commanding aura, the public assumed he was a general knight or divine envoy. Karam asked why he chose to walk. Zenoda said he preferred feeling the flow of wind and hearing the city sounds. Zerial, studying every step, murmured that it wasn't just boredom. Look at how the instructor walked. His center of gravity always in a ready position. If an assassin's arrow fired from a rooftop, he could draw and eliminate the threat in a fraction of a second. Inside the carriage, his range of motion would be limited. He was choosing to walk so he could protect the entire group. Zenoda offered a faint, unreadable smile, neither confirming nor denying. Though in truth, half his real reason was simply having no patience for being crammed into a small space with Alara and three nobles. Inside the carriage, an acutely awkward silence dominated. Three young men facing three young women. Nobody dared speak. Agru cleared the air by asking Lanaya about Zenoda. Anisha immediately declared with loud pride that Mr. Zenoda was their one and only most incredible instructor. When Valerius expressed skepticism about the D-scored student, Lanaya explained that Zenoda was someone who had never once sought public attention or worldly power. Anisha added that he wanted to live as an ordinary human because having everything handed to him easily was unbearably boring. Alara fell silent. The scattered pieces of the puzzle finally clicked together perfectly. This young man was not a failing student putting on airs of strength. He was an ancient dragon who had deliberately chained himself to play among koi in a garden pond. The carriage rolled to a stop at the royal castle. Enormous doors opened with welcoming trumpets. At the far end of the red carpet, the king of Corson sat on his throne, golden crown, crimson robe, gaze sharp as a hawk's. To his left, the elegant queen. To his right, a female sister in sacred robes, capable of reading a soul's aura. Zenoda stepped forward. As his eyes swept the grandeur, a strange feeling washed through him. Nostalgia. This sight reminded him of the days on the throne of Zenith, looking down upon angels and lesser gods prostrating themselves. He'd once ruled in exactly this manner on a scale incomparably vaster. Everyone knelt except Zenoda, who remained standing perfectly upright. The king's brow furrowed. But the instant their eyes locked, the king gasped. His body jolted backward. Cold sweat broke out. In the king's eyes, the young man below had grown to an impossible, boundless size. A colossal cosmic silhouette, eclipsing the sun, seemed to loom behind him. The king of Corson, ruler of millions, felt his deepest instincts scream in primal terror. An absolute symbol of power capable of crushing his entire continent with a single exhale. Realizing he'd let himself slip into nostalgia and unconsciously radiated his natural arrogance, Zenoda blinked. He pressed Ursilium's cosmic aura back to the depths of his soul, dropped into a graceful, semi-kneeling position, fist pressed over his heart in a perfect knight's salute. His apology was delivered with such elegance and refined grace that the king was genuinely impressed. Humbled despite the power he carried, the king accepted the apology in good faith, commanded everyone to rise, let them set formality aside, and proceed to the true purpose of the meeting. The real battle on the political stage of Corson was about to begin.